Welcome, beloved one, to this peaceful bedtime story about Joseph, the beloved son whose life became a beautiful tapestry of God's faithful love and gentle care. I am here to guide you through this sacred journey tonight, a story that spans 13 years of transformation from a young dreamer to a powerful leader, from a pit of despair to a palace of purpose. As we begin this evening together, let me invite you to settle deeply into your bed. Feel the comfort of your warm covers surrounding you like a gentle embrace. Let your head rest heavily upon your pillow and allow every muscle in your body to begin releasing the tension it has carried throughout this day. Take a deep, slow breath. Hold it for just a moment, and then release it completely, feeling peace wash over you like gentle waves upon a quiet shore. Tonight, we will walk alongside Joseph through 13 years of his remarkable journey. We will witness how God's love never left him, even in the darkest valleys. We will see how divine purpose was being woven through every trial, every setback, every moment of uncertainty. And as we journey with Joseph, I pray that your own heart will find rest in the same faithful God who never abandoned this beloved son. Father God, I bring this precious child of yours before you tonight. As they prepare to hear Joseph's story, I ask that you would wrap them in your peace, quiet their mind from the worries of the day, settle their heart in the assurance of your constant presence. Let this story of Joseph become a balm to their soul, reminding them that you are always working, always caring, always preparing something beautiful, even when the path seems uncertain. Guide them into deep, restorative sleep, and let your gentle voice speak comfort to their spirit through Joseph's journey. In Jesus' precious name, I pray. Amen. Let your breathing slow and deepen as we begin in the peaceful hills of Canaan, where 17-year-old Joseph lived with his father, Jacob, and his 11 brothers. Close your eyes and picture the rolling green pastures where flocks of sheep grazed contentedly under the warm, Middle Eastern sun. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of nature, birds singing their evening songs, the soft bleating of sheep, and the whisper of wind through the olive trees. Joseph was different from his brothers, and everyone knew it. He was born to Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, in their later years. Jacob loved all his sons, but Joseph held a special place in his father's heart, the child of promise, the son of his old age, born to the woman he had loved most deeply. This love was evident in the beautiful coat Jacob had made for Joseph, a coat of many colors that shimmered in the sunlight and set him apart from his brothers. As you rest there peacefully, imagine the weight of that colorful coat upon young Joseph's shoulders. It was more than just clothing. It was a symbol of his father's love, a visible sign of the dreams and hopes Jacob carried for this special son. The fabric was soft and fine, woven with threads of crimson and gold, deep blue and rich purple, colors that caught the light and seemed to dance with each movement. But Joseph carried something even more precious than his father's coat. Deep within his heart, God had placed dreams, not ordinary dreams, but visions of a future so magnificent that even Joseph himself could barely comprehend them. These dreams came to him in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world was still wrapped in darkness, and only the stars bore witness to the sacred visions God was planting in his young heart. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream, which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." Feel yourself sinking deeper into your pillow as we consider the innocence of young Joseph. At 17, he possessed that beautiful transparency of youth, when dreams feel so real and wonderful that sharing them seems as natural as breathing. He didn't understand that his dreams would sound like arrogance to his brother's ears. He simply knew that God had shown him something beautiful, and his heart overflowed with the wonder of it. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." Picture Joseph's excitement as he shared this second dream. In his youthful enthusiasm, he could see it all so clearly. The sun representing his father, the moon his mother, and the 11 stars his brothers, all acknowledging the special calling God had placed upon his life. He wasn't boasting, he was marveling. He wasn't seeking to elevate himself. He was simply sharing the wonder of what God had revealed to him in the sacred space of dreams. But his brothers' hearts grew cold with envy. They saw only pride where there was wonder, only arrogance where there was innocence. And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Jacob, with the wisdom of years and his own experience of divine dreams, recognized that God might indeed be speaking through his beloved son. He tucked these words away in his heart, pondering them as Mary would later ponder the angel's words about Jesus. As you settle more deeply into sleep, let your heart be encouraged by this truth. God plants dreams in the hearts of his children long before the season of their fulfillment arrives. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. God knew Joseph's destiny before he was even conceived. Those dreams weren't accidents or wishful thinking. They were divine previews of the extraordinary purpose God had planned for his life. Tonight, as you rest, know that God has dreams for your life too. He sees the fullness of your story, past, present, and future. And he is weaving every thread together into something beautiful. Like Joseph, you may not understand all the dreams God has placed in your heart, but you can trust that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Let the peace of this truth wash over you like gentle rain on thirsty ground. God is dreaming dreams over your life tonight, beloved one. Rest in that wonderful assurance as we continue Joseph's journey together. Allow your body to relax even more deeply as we linger for a moment longer on the beautiful gift of Joseph's coat. In the gentle rhythm of your breathing, imagine the skilled hands that crafted this remarkable garment. Picture Jacob sitting by the fire in the evening hours, carefully selecting each thread, each color, each pattern that would make this coat a masterpiece worthy of his beloved son. The coat of many colors was more than fabric and thread. It was love made visible. In that ancient culture, such a garment was typically reserved for royalty or persons of great honor. By clothing Joseph in this magnificent coat, Jacob was making a public declaration of his love and his hopes for his son's future. Every time Joseph wore it, he carried his father's blessing wrapped around his shoulders. But love gifts sometimes carry unexpected weight, don't they, dear one? As you rest there peacefully, consider how Joseph must have felt wearing this beautiful coat among his brothers. He delighted in his father's love, yes, but he couldn't help but notice the way his brothers' eyes followed him when he wore it. He saw how their faces changed when Jacob called him forward for special tasks or asked him to check on them in the fields. Joseph's heart was tender and loving. He wanted to be close to his brothers, to be included in their fellowship, to earn their respect and affection. But the very gift that expressed his father's love became a barrier between him and the brotherhood he so desired. How often in life do God's blessings create unexpected complications? How frequently do his gifts set us apart in ways we never anticipated? Yet this was all part of God's gentle plan. The coat that caused envy in his brothers' hearts was preparing Joseph for leadership. It was teaching him what it meant to stand alone sometimes, to bear the weight of being different, to carry responsibility that others might not understand. These were lessons he would need in the years to come, when he would wear the robes of Egyptian authority and make decisions that would affect entire nations. As you sink deeper into the comfort of your bed, let yourself imagine the texture of that beautiful coat, perhaps silk from distant lands, woven with gold thread that caught the sunlight. Feel how it might have flowed around Joseph's shoulders as he walked, how it might have felt against his skin, warm and soft and rich with the fragrance of the oils used in its making. Picture young Joseph looking at his reflection in the still waters of a well, seeing himself transformed by his father's gift. In those quiet moments, did he whisper prayers of gratitude? Did he promise God that he would try to be worthy of such love? Did he dream of the day when he might have sons of his own to bless with such extravagant gifts? The coat of many colors was beautiful, but it was also a burden. It marked Joseph as different, as favored, as set apart for purposes his brothers couldn't yet understand. This is often how God's calling works in our lives, beloved. He gives us gifts and dreams and visions that others may not comprehend. He clothes us in his favor, in ways that might create distance between us and those we love most. But God's love is always purposeful. He was preparing Joseph for something magnificent, even when that preparation involved loneliness and misunderstanding. Where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint, but happy is he who keeps the law. Joseph's dreams and his father's love were revelations of God's plan, and though they brought temporary isolation, they would ultimately bring blessing not just to Joseph, but to his entire family and beyond. Tonight, as you rest in the comfort of God's love, remember that his gifts to you, your talents, your dreams, your calling, may sometimes set you apart. They may not always be understood by those around you, but like Joseph's coat, they are expressions of your heavenly Father's incredible love for you. Wear them with humility and grace, knowing that God is preparing you for something beautiful that you may not yet be able to see. Let this truth settle deep into your heart as you drift towards sleep. You are clothed in God's favor, wrapped in his love, adorned with his purposes for your life. Rest peacefully in that wonderful assurance, beloved one. Feel your breathing becoming slower and more rhythmic as we turn our attention to the complex dynamics within Jacob's household. While Joseph was treasuring his dreams and wearing his father's gift with innocent joy, his brothers were wrestling with emotions that grew darker each day. Imagine the scene in the early morning hours when the brothers gathered to break their fast together. Joseph would arrive wearing his beautiful coat, his face bright with the optimism of youth, perhaps still glowing from another dream God had given him in the night. He would sit among his brothers, eager to share in their fellowship, not realizing that his very presence was stirring up painful feelings of jealousy and resentment. Though older brothers remembered their own childhood years, when they too had hoped for special recognition from their father, they had worked hard in the fields, tended the flocks, carried out their responsibilities faithfully. Yet here was their younger brother, seemingly effortless in winning their father's favor, adorned in a coat they could only dream of owning, and speaking of visions that elevated him above them all. As you settle deeper into your pillow, try to understand their struggle with compassion. These were not evil men at heart, but human beings wrestling with the universal pain of feeling less loved, less valued, less special. Their hearts had grown cold not from malice, but from hurt. They felt overlooked, underappreciated, forgotten in the brightness of Joseph's star. Reuben, the oldest, carried the weight of leadership, but not the love he craved from his father. Simeon and Levi burned with passionate natures that often led them into trouble. Judah struggled with his own failures and shortcomings. Each brother had his own story of pain, his own reasons for feeling that Joseph's elevation diminished his own worth in their father's eyes. When Joseph shared his dreams with them, what they heard was not wonder, but arrogance. What they saw was not God's revelation, but their brother's pride. So, you think you're going to rule over us? You believe we're going to bow down to you like you're some kind of king? The irony, of course, was that Joseph's dreams were not about his own glory, but about God's plan to save them all. The very visions that filled them with rage were actually prophecies of how Joseph would one day preserve their lives during a terrible famine. But they couldn't see that then. All they could see was their own pain reflected in their brother's apparent superiority. Genesis tells us that their hatred grew stronger each day. They could not speak peaceably to him. Imagine the family meals where conversations grew stilted and cold whenever Joseph entered. Picture the way they would turn away when he approached, or speak in hushed tones that excluded him from their circle. Joseph, with his tender heart, surely felt this coldness. He must have wondered what he had done wrong, why his brothers who had once played with him and taught him and protected him now looked at him with such distance in their eyes. This was perhaps his first real taste of the loneliness that often accompanies divine calling. But even in this painful family dynamic, God was at work. He was teaching Joseph lessons he would need in the years ahead. Lessons about human nature, about the way jealousy and hurt can corrupt relationships, about the cost of leadership, and the isolation that sometimes comes with being set apart for God's purposes. The brothers' coldness was not God's desire for the family, but he used even their sinful responses to shape his beloved Joseph. Through their rejection, Joseph was learning to depend more fully on God's love rather than human approval. Through their misunderstanding, he was developing the emotional resilience he would need to lead a nation. As you rest tonight, beloved, remember that even the painful relationships in your life are not outside of God's sovereign care. He can use even rejection and misunderstanding to prepare you for the beautiful purposes he has planned for your future. Like Joseph, you may not understand why some people respond to you with coldness when your heart is only seeking love and acceptance. But God sees the bigger picture, and He is using every experience to shape you into the person He created you to be. Let your heart be comforted by this truth as you drift deeper into peaceful sleep. God's love for you never wavers, even when human love fails. His purposes for your life are not dependent on others' approval or understanding. Rest securely in His faithful care, knowing that He is working all things together for your good and His glory. Sleep peacefully now, precious one, wrapped in the assurance of God's unchanging love. Breathe slowly and deeply as we come to the day that would change Joseph's life forever. It began like many other days, with the sun rising gently over the hills of Canaan, and Jacob calling his beloved son to his side. The old patriarch had been concerned about his older sons, who had taken the flocks to graze in the distant fields near Shechem, many miles from home. Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. It was a simple request, the kind that Joseph had fulfilled many times before. He would make the journey, check on his brother's welfare, and return with news that would ease his father's mind. Picture young Joseph preparing for this journey, pulling on his traveling sandals, gathering provisions for the road, and yes, wrapping his beautiful coat around his shoulders. He had no idea that this would be the last time he would see his father's house for many years to come. He had no premonition that the brothers he was going to check on were about to change the entire course of his life. As you rest peacefully in your bed, imagine Joseph walking along the dusty roads of ancient Palestine. The journey from Hebron to Shechem was about 50 miles, a trek that would take him 2 or 3 days on foot. Picture him walking through the gentle hills, perhaps singing psalms his father had taught him, his young heart filled with the dreams God had given him and the love his father had showered upon him. The landscape around him was beautiful, olive groves and vineyards, rocky hillsides dotted with wild flowers, ancient oak trees providing shade for travelers. Joseph probably knew these roads well, having traveled them with his father and brothers in earlier, happier times. Each familiar landmark might have brought back memories of family journeys, stories his father had told him about their ancestors who had walked these same paths. But when Joseph reached Shechem, he discovered that his brothers were not there. A kind stranger found him wandering in the fields and told him, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph's journey continued, another 15 miles northward, his sandals raising small clouds of dust with each step. Let your mind rest in the providence of God in this seemingly small detail. That unnamed stranger who gave Joseph directions was an instrument in God's hand, guiding this beloved son toward his destiny. God was orchestrating every moment of this day, even the ones that seemed ordinary and unremarkable. As Joseph approached Dothan, his brothers saw him coming from far off. His colorful coat made him easily recognizable against the brown and green landscape. But instead of joy at seeing their younger brother after his long journey, their hearts filled with a darkness that had been growing for months. "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." Can you imagine the shock that must have gone through Joseph's system when he realized that his own brothers, the ones he had traveled so far to check on, the ones he loved despite their coldness, were plotting his destruction? Picture him approaching their camp with a smile on his face, perhaps calling out greetings, only to see hatred in their eyes and hear murderous words on their lips. This was Joseph's first real encounter with the mystery of evil, the confusing reality that sometimes the people we love most can hurt us most deeply. His innocent world was about to be shattered, his trust broken, his understanding of life forever changed. But even in this dark moment, God's protective hand was at work. Reuben, the oldest brother, still retained enough conscience to prevent Joseph's murder. "Let us not kill him, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him." Reuben was secretly planning to return later and rescue Joseph, to restore him safely to their father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Feel your body relaxing even more deeply as we pause on this moment of terrible betrayal. Joseph, who had walked for days to check on his brother's welfare, found himself stripped of his father's gift of love and thrown into a dark pit in the wilderness. The beautiful coat that had been woven with such care and given with such love was torn from his body and cast aside like a worthless rag. But beloved one, even as we witness this act of cruelty, we must remember that God had not abandoned Joseph. Though he was in a pit, he was not outside of God's care. Though his brothers had rejected him, He was not rejected by his heavenly Father. Though his earthly circumstances had suddenly become dark and frightening, God's light still shone upon his life. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let this truth comfort your heart. There is no pit so deep that God's love cannot reach you there. There is no betrayal so painful that God cannot heal it and use it for your good. There is no darkness so complete that God's light cannot penetrate it with hope and purpose. Rest now, precious child of God, knowing that even when life takes unexpected turns, even when people disappoint us, even when our circumstances seem to crumble around us, our God remains faithful. He is writing a story of redemption that is far more beautiful than anything we could imagine. Sleep peacefully in that assurance, beloved. Let your breathing slow to a peaceful rhythm as we sit quietly with Joseph in the depths of that wilderness pit. Picture the darkness surrounding him, complete and absolute, broken only by the small circle of light far above where his brothers had thrown him down. The walls were rough stone, impossible to climb, and the bottom was hard earth, dry but cold in the shadows. Imagine the silence that must have fallen over Joseph's heart in those first moments. The shock of betrayal can create a numbness of spirit, a disbelief so profound that the mind struggles to accept what has just occurred. His own brothers, the ones who had shared his childhood, who knew his gentle heart, who had seen his love for them despite their coldness, had torn the gift of his father's love from his body and cast him into this pit like a piece of refuse. The beautiful coat of many colors, now lying crumpled and discarded above, had been more than clothing to Joseph. It was the tangible expression of his father's love, the visible sign of his place in the family, the symbol of dreams and hope and belonging. Now it was gone, and he sat in darkness, stripped of everything that had defined his identity in the world above. But even in the pit, beloved one, Joseph was not alone. The same God who had given him dreams in his father's house was with him in this place of abandonment. The same loving presence that had filled his heart with visions of the future was surrounding him now in his darkest hour. God had not forgotten Joseph, not for a single moment. As you rest peacefully in your bed tonight, let your heart be comforted by this truth. There is no place you can go where God is not already there waiting for you. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. Even in the depths of Joseph's pit, God's love was present, God's purposes were at work, and God's protection was surrounding his beloved son. Picture Joseph in those hours of darkness and solitude. Perhaps he wept. How could he not? The pain of betrayal, the fear of what might come next, the overwhelming sense of loss and confusion. All of these emotions must have flooded through his young heart like a torrent. But even his tears were precious to God, who was collecting every one of them in his bottle, as the psalmist would later write. Maybe Joseph prayed, calling out to the God of his fathers, asking for understanding, for rescue, for the strength to endure whatever lay ahead. Perhaps he remembered the stories his father had told him, about Abraham's faithfulness, about Isaac's patience, about Jacob's perseverance through years of difficulty. These family stories of God's faithfulness would have been like lifelines thrown down into the pit to sustain his hope. And what of his dreams? Did Joseph think about them there in the darkness? Did he wonder how visions of sheaves bowing down and stars showing him honor could possibly come to pass when he was trapped in a pit, abandoned by his own family? The dreams must have seemed like cruel mockeries now, distant memories of a more innocent time when the future had seemed bright with promise. But God's word never fails, precious one. Even when circumstances seem to contradict every promise God has made, his purposes remain unchanged. The dreams he had given Joseph were not dependent on human cooperation or favorable circumstances. They were divine revelations of what God himself would accomplish in and through Joseph's life, regardless of what others might do to try to prevent them. While Joseph sat in the pit, his brothers sat down to eat bread, displaying a callousness that is difficult to comprehend. How could they consume their meal while their brother languished in darkness just yards away? But this too was part of God's mysterious plan. Their hard hearts were positioning them to make a decision that would seem like further cruelty, but would actually be Joseph's pathway to destiny. In the pit, Joseph was learning lessons that could not be taught in any other classroom. He was discovering that God's presence is not dependent on favorable circumstances. He was finding that hope can survive even when everything around us suggests despair. He was beginning to understand that sometimes God's purposes require us to go through seasons of stripping away, where everything we thought defined us is removed, so that we can discover our true identity in Him alone. This is often how God works in our lives too, beloved. Sometimes He allows us to experience our own version of the pit, seasons where we feel abandoned, misunderstood, stripped of the things we thought were essential to our happiness or success. But these are not punishments. They are places of preparation. They are not signs of God's displeasure, but opportunities for deeper intimacy with Him. As you drift toward peaceful sleep tonight, know that if you are in a pit season of your own life, God has not forgotten you. His love surrounds you even in the darkness. His purposes for your life remain unchanged, no matter how impossible they might seem from your current vantage point. The same God who was with Joseph in his pit is with you in yours, working all things together for your good and His glory. Let this truth wash over you like a gentle balm. Your pit is not your final destination. It is not the end of your story, but a crucial chapter in the beautiful narrative God is writing through your life. Rest peacefully in that hope, knowing that your Redeemer lives and your story is far from over. Sleep deeply now, beloved child of God, held securely in His everlasting arms. Allow your body to sink deeper into the comfort of your bed as we witness the next movement in God's sovereign plan for Joseph's life. While the young man sat in the darkness of the pit, the sound of approaching voices and camel bells began to drift across the wilderness. Sounds that would herald the beginning of his journey toward the destiny God had prepared for him. Genesis 37:25 tells us, "And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, going down to Egypt." Picture this caravan in your mind's eye as you rest peacefully. A long line of traders with their laden camels, traveling the ancient trade route between Mesopotamia and Egypt. The timing was not coincidental, beloved. God had orchestrated this moment with perfect precision. At the exact time when Joseph's brothers needed to make a decision about their brother's fate, He provided a caravan that would carry Joseph away from death toward life, away from the familiar toward the foreign, away from his past toward his future. Judah, one of the brothers, saw the approaching merchants and spoke words that he thought were motivated by greed, but were actually inspired by divine providence. "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." Little did Judah know that his desire to avoid fraternal bloodshed was being used by God to save not only Joseph's life, but eventually the lives of his entire family. Genesis 37:28 records the fateful transaction. Then Midianite traders passed by, so that the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. 20 shekels of silver, that was the price of a slave, the value the brothers placed on their younger brother's life. To them, it seemed like a tidy profit from an unwanted problem. To God, it was the precise price required to position his beloved son exactly where he needed to be for the unfolding of his magnificent plan. Picture Joseph being pulled up out of the pit, blinking in the sudden brightness of the sun, perhaps hopeful for a moment that his brothers had relented and decided to show mercy. Instead, he found himself face to face with foreign traders, men whose language and customs were different from his own, whose destination was the land of Egypt, a place he had heard about in his father's stories, but never imagined he would see. As you rest there peacefully, try to imagine the emotional whirlwind that must have engulfed Joseph in those moments. Relief at being rescued from the pit gave way to horror as he realized he was being sold as a slave. The familiar faces of his brothers, cold and unmoved by his pleas, perhaps asking him how his dreams looked now. The rough hands of the merchants binding him for the journey, treating him as mere merchandise to be transported and sold. But even in this moment of seeming abandonment, God's protecting hand was upon Joseph. The caravan he was joining was not composed of cruel raiders or brutal slave dealers, but merchants carrying precious cargo, spices, balm, and myrrh, aromatic substances that would make the journey to Egypt more pleasant for everyone involved. Even the smell of the caravan would be sweet rather than harsh. A small mercy from a loving God who cares about every detail of his children's circumstances. The journey to Egypt would take many days, giving Joseph time to process what had happened to him, to grieve the loss of his former life, and to begin adjusting to his new reality. Picture him walking alongside the camels, no longer wearing his beautiful coat, but dressed as a slave, his hands bound, his future uncertain. Yet God was walking beside him every step of the way, preparing his heart for what lay ahead. This is often how God moves us from one season of life to another, precious one. What appears to be a devastating setback is actually a divine setup. What looks like rejection is actually redirection. What feels like punishment is actually positioning for purpose. The very circumstances that seem to contradict God's promises are often the means by which He fulfills them. Psalm 105 and 17:18 describes this moment from God's perspective. He sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with fetters. He was laid in irons. Notice the language. He sent a man before them. God didn't merely allow Joseph to be sold into slavery. He sent him there. This wasn't a detour from God's plan. It was the very path God had chosen to accomplish His purposes. The brothers thought they were getting rid of the dreamer and his troublesome visions. They had no idea they were actually setting in motion the very events that would make those dreams come true. They were attempting to destroy God's plan, but were actually fulfilling it. This is the beautiful irony of divine sovereignty. Even when people mean evil against us, God means it for good. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let your heart be encouraged by this truth. God is the master of making beautiful tapestries from the tangled threads of human choices. He can take the worst intentions of others and weave them into His perfect will for your life. The very situations that seem designed to derail your destiny may actually be delivering you to it. If you are in a season where life has taken an unexpected turn, where you feel like you've been pulled out of one pit only to find yourself in a different kind of captivity, remember Joseph's story. God was with him on that dusty road to Egypt, and He is with you on whatever road you're traveling tonight. Rest peacefully in the assurance that your life is not subject to the whims of others or the randomness of circumstance. You are held securely in the hands of a sovereign God who works all things together for your good and His glory. Let that truth carry you into deep, peaceful sleep. The caravan moves steadily toward Egypt, and God's plan moves steadily toward its beautiful fulfillment. Sleep well, beloved one. Let your breathing become slow and rhythmic as we travel with Joseph into the ancient land of Egypt, a realm that would have seemed like another world to this young Hebrew shepherd. After many days of walking alongside the merchant caravan, Joseph finally glimpsed the Nile River in the distance, that great lifeline of Egyptian civilization, whose annual floods brought life to the desert and prosperity to the kingdom. Picture the scene through Joseph's eyes as you rest peacefully tonight. Egypt in that era was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on earth, with magnificent temples reaching toward the heavens, cities bustling with activity, and canals carrying the life-giving waters of the Nile throughout the land. The architecture was unlike anything Joseph had ever seen. Massive stone structures that seemed to dwarf humanity, covered with intricate hieroglyphs and painted in brilliant colors that caught and reflected the abundant sunlight. The people were different too, their skin darker than his own, their clothing flowing and elegant, their language musical but completely foreign to his ears. The very air was different in Egypt, heavy with moisture from the great river and fragrant with spices and incense from countless temples and marketplaces. For Joseph, who had grown up among the simple tents and familiar hills of Canaan, this must have been overwhelming. Everything he saw, heard, and smelled was strange and new. He was not just in a foreign country. He was in a foreign world, where the very rhythm of life was different from anything he had known. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine how Joseph must have felt as the reality of his situation became clear. He was no longer Jacob's beloved son, no longer the dreamer whose visions had filled him with hope and purpose. He was now a piece of property to be sold to the highest bidder, a young man whose value would be determined by his usefulness to whoever purchased him. But even as Joseph faced this humbling reality, the same God who had given him dreams in his father's house was preparing a place for him in this strange land. Genesis 37:36 tells us simply, "Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard." Potiphar was no ordinary Egyptian citizen. He was a man of significant influence and responsibility, a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's government, trusted with the security of the royal household. God's providence had guided Joseph not into the hands of a cruel master or into the misery of common slavery, but into a position where his gifts and character could be recognized and developed. This is how our loving God works, precious one. Even when we find ourselves in circumstances we never chose, in places we never wanted to be, He goes before us to prepare the way. He positions us exactly where we need to be for the next chapter of His plan to unfold. What seems like random chance to human eyes is actually divine orchestration to the eyes of faith. Picture Joseph standing in the slave market, perhaps still wearing the rough garments of his journey, his hands still bearing the marks where the ropes had bound him. He would have felt small and insignificant among the grandeur of Egyptian civilization. Yet God was already at work, softening Potiphar's heart to see something special in this young Hebrew slave. Perhaps it was Joseph's bearing. Despite his circumstances, he still carried himself with the dignity that came from knowing he was loved by his father and called by God. Maybe it was something in his eyes, a depth and intelligence that spoke of his ability to dream dreams and see visions. Or possibly it was simply the favor of God resting upon him so tangibly that even a pagan Egyptian could sense there was something different about this young man. Whatever drew Potiphar to purchase Joseph, we can be certain it was not mere coincidence. The same God who had watched over Joseph in his father's house, who had protected him in the pit, who had guided him safely through the journey to Egypt, was now placing him in a household where his gifts could be discovered and his character refined. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of God's love for his children, beloved. He doesn't just rescue us from difficult situations. He positions us for growth and purpose even within them. He doesn't just sustain us through trials. He uses those very trials to prepare us for the blessings he has planned for our future. As Joseph entered Potiphar's house for the first time, he could not have imagined what the next phase of his journey would hold. He couldn't see that God was positioning him to learn the language and customs of Egypt, to understand the workings of government and administration, to develop the skills he would need when he one day ruled over this very land. All Joseph could see was his immediate reality. He was a slave in a foreign land, separated from everyone and everything he had ever loved. But God could see the bigger picture. He could see how every experience in Potiphar's house would be preparing Joseph for palace responsibility. He could see how every challenge would be developing the character Joseph would need to save not just Egypt, but his own family from the coming famine. Tonight, as you rest in the comfort of your bed, let your heart be encouraged by Joseph's example. If you find yourself in circumstances you didn't choose, in places you never planned to be, remember that God's hand is still upon your life. He is still working out his purposes through your situation, still preparing you for the beautiful future he has planned. Like Joseph, you may not be able to see the bigger picture from where you stand right now, but you can trust the one who sees the end from the beginning, who knows exactly where he is leading you and why. You can rest in the assurance that no circumstance is too difficult for him to use for your good, no situation too challenging for him to transform into blessing. Sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that the same God who guided Joseph into Potiphar's house is guiding your steps as well. Trust in his perfect timing, his perfect positioning, and his perfect love for you. Your journey is far from over, beloved one. Like Joseph, your greatest chapters may still be ahead of you. Allow your body to relax completely as we witness the beautiful way God's favor began to shine through Joseph's life, even in the challenging circumstances of slavery. Genesis 39:2-3 tells us something remarkable. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Picture this transformation taking place gradually, like the gentle sunrise that slowly illuminates a landscape. When Joseph first arrived at Potiphar's house, he was just another slave, one among many servants who carried out the daily tasks required to maintain a wealthy Egyptian household. But there was something different about this young Hebrew, something that began to manifest itself in everything he touched. Perhaps it started with small things. Maybe Joseph showed up early for his duties, worked with a diligence that exceeded what was required, or demonstrated an integrity that set him apart from the other servants. In a culture where slaves often did only the minimum necessary to avoid punishment, Joseph's wholehearted commitment to excellence would have been remarkable. As you settle more deeply into peaceful rest, imagine Potiphar beginning to notice these qualities in his new slave. Here was a young man who didn't just complete his assigned tasks, but looked for ways to improve them. He didn't just follow orders, but anticipated needs. He didn't work with the grudging reluctance of a slave, but with the devoted heart of someone who saw his service as something sacred. This was because Joseph understood something profound about the nature of work and service. Even though he was technically a slave, serving against his will in a foreign land, he recognized that his ultimate master was not Potiphar, but the God of heaven. As Colossians 3:23 would later instruct, "And whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord, and not to men." Joseph was working as unto the Lord, and God was blessing that heart attitude with visible success. Genesis 39:4-5 continues the beautiful account. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. What a remarkable progression this represents. Joseph went from being a recently purchased slave to becoming the overseer of everything Potiphar owned. This wasn't just about Joseph's natural abilities or work ethic, though those were certainly factors. This was about the supernatural blessing of God resting upon Joseph's life in such a tangible way that even a pagan Egyptian could recognize it. Potiphar may not have understood the Hebrew God whom Joseph served, but he couldn't deny the results. Every project Joseph managed succeeded. Every responsibility he was given flourished under his care. Every aspect of the household that came under Joseph's oversight began to prosper in ways that could only be explained by divine blessing. Picture Potiphar's amazement as he watched his household transform under Joseph's management. Fields that had been moderately productive became abundantly fruitful. Servants who had been careless began working with new efficiency. Business ventures that Potiphar had been concerned about began generating unexpected profits. It was as if the very presence of this young Hebrew brought blessing with it wherever it went. This is one of the most encouraging truths in all of Scripture, beloved one. When we belong to God and serve Him faithfully, His blessing doesn't just affect our own lives, it spills over to benefit everyone around us. Our families are blessed because of our relationship with God. Our workplaces prosper when we bring our faith into our daily responsibilities. Our communities are strengthened when God's people live with integrity and excellence. Joseph's success in Potiphar's house wasn't just personal advancement. It was a testimony to the reality and power of the God he served. Every Egyptian who observed his life was witnessing the difference that knowing the true God could make. Every task he completed with excellence was a sermon about the character of the one who had called him and gifted him. But perhaps most beautiful of all, Joseph's faithfulness in Potiphar's house was preparing him for much greater responsibilities to come. God was teaching him administrative skills, leadership principles, and cultural understanding that he would need when he eventually stood before Pharaoh himself. Every challenge he faced as overseer of Potiphar's household was developing capabilities he would use to govern all of Egypt. This is how God works in our lives too, precious one. He often prepares us for our destiny through the daily faithfulness of our current circumstances. The job you have now, the responsibilities you carry today, the challenges you face in your present situation, all of these may be God's training ground for something much greater He has planned for your future. As you rest tonight, let your heart be encouraged by Joseph's example. Even when life takes us to places we never planned to go, even when we find ourselves in circumstances we wouldn't have chosen, God can use our faithfulness in those very situations to prepare us for blessings we can't yet imagine. Joseph couldn't see it then, but his years in Potiphar's house were not a detour from God's plan. They were an essential part of it. The skills he was learning, the character he was developing, the favor he was experiencing, all of this was preparing him for the day when Pharaoh would need someone with exactly his qualifications to save Egypt from famine. God is doing the same thing in your life right now, beloved. Your current circumstances, challenging as they may be, are not obstacles to your destiny. They are the pathway to it. Trust Him to work through every situation for your good and His glory. Sleep peacefully in that wonderful assurance, knowing that God's favor rests upon your life just as surely as it rested upon Joseph's. Like Joseph, you will find that faithful service in small things prepares you for faithful service in great things. Rest well, precious child of God. Your story of favor and blessing is still being written. Let your breathing slow to a peaceful rhythm as we come to one of the most challenging chapters in Joseph's journey, a season that would test not just his commitment to God, but the very core of who he was as a man of integrity. Success and favor can be wonderful gifts, but they often bring temptations that are more dangerous than any hardship we might face. As Joseph's responsibilities in Potiphar's house grew, so did his influence and the respect he commanded from everyone in the household. Genesis 39:6 tells us that Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. This represents an extraordinary level of trust. Potiphar was so confident in Joseph's integrity and ability that he gave him complete control over his entire estate. But there was one area where Joseph's authority did not extend, and it was here that his greatest test would come. Picture the scene as you rest peacefully tonight. Joseph, now a young man in his prime, handsome and strong, carrying himself with the confidence that comes from knowing God's favor rests upon his life. He had grown from the 17-year-old boy who had been thrown into a pit into a mature man of approximately 27, seasoned by experience but still young enough to feel the full force of physical desire. Genesis 39:7 records the beginning of this trial with simple but sobering words. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." Here was temptation in its most alluring form, not just physical desire, but the opportunity for advancement, the chance to gain even more favor with his master's family, the possibility of using his attractiveness to secure his position even more firmly. In that ancient culture, slaves often had little choice but to comply with their master's demands, regardless of their personal feelings. Joseph could have rationalized that he was simply being obedient, that he had no choice in the matter, that God would understand his impossible situation. But Joseph's response reveals the depth of character that God had been developing in him through all his trials. Genesis 39:8-9 gives us his magnificent reply. But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, My master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? As you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, let the power of Joseph's words wash over you. Notice the multiple levels of his reasoning. First, he recognized the trust that Potiphar had placed in him, a trust that would be betrayed by such an act. Second, he understood his position of responsibility in the household and refused to abuse it for personal gratification. But most importantly, he saw this temptation for what it truly was, not just a betrayal of human trust, but a great wickedness and sin against God. This is the mark of true spiritual maturity, beloved one. Joseph didn't just consider the horizontal implications of his choices, the effect on his master, his position, his future prospects. He considered the vertical dimension, how his actions would affect his relationship with the God who had been so faithful to him throughout his journey. But the temptation didn't end with his initial refusal. Genesis 39:10 tells us, "So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her." This was not a single moment of testing, but a daily assault on his integrity. Day after day, Joseph had to make the same choice over and over again. Day after day, he had to say no to immediate pleasure for the sake of long-term faithfulness. Picture Joseph going about his daily duties, managing Potiphar's affairs with his usual excellence, but always having to be on guard against this persistent temptation. This woman held significant power in the household, and her continued advances put Joseph in an increasingly difficult position. He couldn't simply avoid her entirely. His responsibilities required him to be present in the house. But he could, and did, refuse to compromise his integrity regardless of the pressure. This daily resistance to temptation was actually strengthening Joseph's character in ways that no other experience could have. Like a muscle that grows stronger through repeated exercise, his moral resolve was being fortified through each choice to do right. God was using even this trial to prepare Joseph for the much greater responsibilities and temptations he would face when he eventually ruled over Egypt. 1 Corinthians 10:13 reminds us, "No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it." God was providing Joseph with the strength to resist day after day, because he had purposes for Joseph's life that required this level of character development. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let your heart be encouraged by Joseph's example. In a world that often tells us to give in to our desires, to take what we want regardless of the consequences, Joseph's story reminds us that there is something far more valuable than immediate gratification, the approval of our Heavenly Father, and the peace that comes from knowing we have acted with integrity. Whatever temptations you may be facing in your own life, remember that God sees your struggle, and He is providing the strength you need to overcome. Like Joseph, you can choose faithfulness over pleasure, integrity over immediate gain, long-term blessing over short-term satisfaction. The furnace of integrity may be hot, beloved, but it produces gold that is refined and precious in God's sight. Joseph's character was being perfected through this trial, preparing him for the day when he would need to make decisions that would affect entire nations. Rest peacefully tonight, knowing that your faithfulness in small things, is preparing you for faithfulness in great things. God sees every choice you make for righteousness, every temptation you resist, every moment you choose His will over your own desires. Sleep well, precious one. Your integrity is being forged in the furnace of daily choices, and God is pleased with your faithfulness. Let your body relax completely as we come to one of the most challenging moments in Joseph's story. The moment when doing right led to seeming disaster, when integrity brought imprisonment, when faithfulness to God resulted in false accusation and punishment. This is perhaps the hardest lesson any believer must learn. Sometimes following God leads us into deeper darkness before it leads us into light. Genesis 39:11-12 tells us what happened when Joseph's consistent refusal finally drove Potiphar's wife to desperation. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Picture this moment in your mind as you rest peacefully tonight. Joseph, caught off guard by this aggressive advance, had to make a split-second decision. He could have reasoned that resistance was futile, that he was trapped with no witnesses to defend him, that compliance might be the safer choice. Instead, he literally ran from temptation, leaving his garment behind as evidence of the struggle, but preserving his integrity intact. This was Joseph's coat moment all over again. Another garment torn away from him because of the choices of others. First, his brothers had stripped him of the coat of many colors that represented his father's love. Now, his commitment to purity had cost him another garment, this one to be used as false evidence against him. But just as God had not abandoned him when his colorful coat was taken, He would not abandon him now. What happened next reveals the fury of a woman scorned and the danger that righteous people sometimes face when they refuse to compromise. Genesis 39:13-18 records her false accusation. She claimed that Joseph had attempted to assault her, using his abandoned garment as proof of her lie. When Potiphar returned home, she repeated her false story, painting Joseph as a dangerous predator who had betrayed his master's trust. As you settle deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine Joseph's shock and heartbreak as he heard these accusations. Here was a man who had served with absolute faithfulness, who had brought blessing to everything he touched, who had consistently chosen integrity even when it cost him dearly. Now he found himself branded as a criminal, accused of the very sin he had repeatedly refused to commit. Genesis 39:19-20 tells us the immediate result. So it was, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "Your servant did to me after this manner," that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and there he was in prison. Another pit, this time not in the wilderness, but in the depths of an Egyptian prison. Joseph must have wondered if this was the reward for faithfulness, if this was what came to those who chose integrity over compromise. The dreams God had given him in his youth must have seemed more distant than ever. How could visions of rulership and honor be fulfilled from the confines of a prison cell? But notice something beautiful in the text, beloved one. Verse 20 doesn't end with, "and there he was in prison," as a final statement of defeat. Instead, verse 21 immediately follows with these hope-filled words. "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Even in prison, God's presence had not left Joseph. Even in the darkest circumstances, God's favor continued to rest upon his life. Even when human justice had failed and false accusations had triumphed, divine love remained constant and unchanging. This is one of the most encouraging truths in all of Scripture. Precious one, there is no prison so secure that God cannot enter it with you. There is no false accusation so convincing that it can separate you from God's love. There is no injustice so complete that it can thwart God's ultimate purposes for your life. Picture Joseph in those first dark hours in prison, perhaps wondering if God had forgotten him, if his faithfulness had been in vain, if the dreams of his youth were merely wishful thinking. But even as these doubts may have assailed his mind, God was already at work, preparing to turn this apparent defeat into another step toward ultimate victory. Prison would become Joseph's graduate school in leadership and human nature. Here he would encounter officials from Pharaoh's court, learning about the inner workings of Egyptian government. Here he would develop his gifts of dream interpretation, preparing for the day when Pharaoh himself would need someone with exactly his abilities. Here he would face the deepest darkness of his journey, making his eventual elevation to the palace even more miraculous and meaningful. This is how God works in the lives of his children, beloved. He doesn't waste our pain. He uses it to prepare us for our purpose. He doesn't ignore our faithfulness. He rewards it in ways we couldn't have imagined. He doesn't abandon us in the pit. He meets us there and begins working to bring us out stronger than before. Romans 8:28 reminds us that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. This promise covers even false accusations, even unjust imprisonment, even the seasons when doing right seems to lead to disaster. God can weave even these dark threads into the beautiful tapestry of his plan for our lives. As you drift into peaceful sleep tonight, let your heart be comforted by this truth. If you are in a prison season of your own, whether literal or figurative, God has not forgotten you. Your faithfulness has not gone unnoticed. Your integrity has not been wasted. The God who was with Joseph in his prison cell is with you in your difficult circumstances, working all things together for your good and his glory. Sometimes the very trials that seem designed to destroy our dreams are actually positioning us to fulfill them in ways more beautiful than we ever imagined. Joseph's prison was not the end of his story, but the prelude to his greatest chapter. Rest well, precious child of God, knowing that your faithful God is with you in every season, preparing you for the beautiful future he has planned. Allow your breathing to become slow and peaceful as we witness one of the most remarkable demonstrations of God's faithfulness in the entire Bible. Even in the depths of an Egyptian prison, even after being falsely accused and unjustly condemned, Joseph's story was far from over. In fact, it was about to take another turn that would reveal the incredible power of God's presence to transform any circumstance, no matter how dark or hopeless it might appear. Genesis 39:21-23 gives us this beautiful account. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. As you rest peacefully in your bed tonight, let the wonder of this transformation wash over you. Here was Joseph, recently arrived as a condemned prisoner, expected to languish in darkness and despair like so many others who had been thrown into this place of punishment. Instead, within a remarkably short time, he had become the prison administrator, trusted by the keeper with the oversight of all the other prisoners and the daily operations of the facility. This was not just about Joseph's natural abilities or previous experience, though those certainly played a part. This was another demonstration of the supernatural favor of God that followed Joseph wherever he went. Even in prison, the blessing of the Lord made everything under Joseph's care prosper. Even in confinement, his integrity and excellence set him apart and opened doors that seemed permanently closed. Picture the prison keeper watching in amazement as this young Hebrew transformed the atmosphere of the entire facility. Prisoners who had been sullen and rebellious began cooperating under Joseph's leadership. Administrative tasks that had been burdensome and chaotic became efficient and orderly. The very presence of this man seemed to bring a peace and productivity that the keeper had never experienced before. This favor wasn't just about making Joseph's circumstances more comfortable, though God certainly cared about that. This was preparation, another phase of the divine education that was equipping Joseph for the responsibilities that lay ahead. In Potiphar's house, he had learned to manage a wealthy household. Now, in prison, he was learning to lead in the most challenging circumstances, to bring order out of chaos, to earn respect and cooperation from people who had no reason to follow anyone. These were exactly the skills he would need when he eventually stood before Pharaoh and was given responsibility for managing all of Egypt during the years of plenty and famine. God was using even this unjust imprisonment to prepare his servant for a role that would require wisdom, compassion, and administrative excellence beyond anything Joseph had yet experienced. But perhaps most importantly, prison was teaching Joseph lessons about the heart of God that he could never have learned in more comfortable circumstances. In the depths of confinement, surrounded by men who had made terrible choices and were paying terrible prices, Joseph was discovering the depths of divine mercy and grace. He was learning that God's love reaches into the darkest places, that his presence can transform the most hopeless situations. Among the prisoners under Joseph's care were men from every walk of life: thieves and murderers, debtors and political prisoners, those who deserved their fate and those who, like Joseph himself, had been victims of injustice. Each one had a story. Each one carried pain and regret. Each one needed hope. Joseph's role as their overseer gave him countless opportunities to show kindness, to speak words of encouragement, to demonstrate the character of the God he served. This experience was softening Joseph's heart and broadening his understanding of human nature in ways that would serve him well when he eventually ruled over millions of people. He was learning to see past external circumstances to the human need beneath. He was developing compassion for those who suffered, wisdom for those who struggled, and patience for those who had lost their way. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, let your heart be encouraged by the truth that God's presence with Joseph in prison represents. No matter where life takes you, no matter what circumstances you face, no matter how confined or limited your situation might seem, God is with you there. His presence doesn't depend on your comfort or success. His love doesn't diminish when your circumstances become difficult. Like Joseph, you may find that your greatest seasons of growth and preparation happen in the places you least expected, during the experiences you wouldn't have chosen. God's education often takes place in classrooms we never wanted to enter, but the lessons learned there are invaluable for the future he has planned. Psalm 105:19 speaks of this season in Joseph's life. Until the time that his word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested him. The dreams God had given Joseph were still true, still valid, still destined for fulfillment. But between the giving of the dream and its realization, there was a season of testing, not to destroy the dream, but to prepare the dreamer. God was testing Joseph's character, refining his faith, developing his abilities, and deepening his understanding of both divine grace and human need. Every day in prison was another day of preparation for the palace. Every challenge he faced as prison administrator was training for the challenges he would face as Egypt's prime minister. If you are in your own prison season tonight, whether it's literal confinement or simply circumstances that feel limiting and confining, remember that God is with you there. His favor can transform any situation. His presence can bring blessing even in the darkest places. His love can use even unjust circumstances to prepare you for the beautiful future he has planned. Rest peacefully in that assurance, beloved one. Your current circumstances are not your final destination. Like Joseph, you are being prepared for something greater than you can imagine. Trust the process, even when you can't see the purpose. Sleep well, knowing that the same God who was with Joseph in his prison is with you in yours, working all things together for your good and his glory. Let your body settle into complete relaxation as we come to a pivotal moment in Joseph's prison experience, a season when God would begin using him in a very special way, revealing through him the meanings of dreams and visions. This chapter of Joseph's story would plant seeds that would eventually grow into his liberation and elevation, though Joseph himself could not have known it at the time. Genesis 40:1-3 sets the scene. It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. Picture this development as you rest peacefully tonight. Two high-ranking officials from Pharaoh's court, men who had intimate access to the king of Egypt, who understood the inner workings of the palace, who moved in circles of power and influence that seemed impossibly distant from Joseph's current circumstances, had suddenly found themselves sharing his prison cell. What appeared to be mere coincidence was actually divine orchestration. The butler and baker were not ordinary servants, but trusted officials who held positions of significant responsibility in Pharaoh's household. The chief butler was responsible for all the wine that came to Pharaoh's table, a role that required absolute trustworthiness, since he essentially held the king's life in his hands with every cup he served. The chief baker similarly held a position of trust and influence, overseeing all the bread and food that reached the royal table. For such men to be imprisoned indicated they had committed serious offenses in Pharaoh's eyes, or at least had been suspected of such offenses. They had fallen from the heights of royal favor into the depths of uncertainty, not knowing whether they would eventually be restored to their positions or executed for their alleged crimes. Genesis 44 tells us, "And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, so they were in custody for a while." Once again, we see Joseph being given responsibility and trust, even in prison. The captain of the guard, quite possibly Potiphar himself, recognized Joseph's reliability and placed these important prisoners under his personal care. This arrangement was another example of God positioning Joseph exactly where he needed to be for the next phase of his plan. By serving these men personally, Joseph would have opportunity to build relationships with them, to hear their stories, to demonstrate his character and wisdom. He was unknowingly establishing connections that would later prove crucial to his own destiny. One morning, Joseph noticed that both men seemed particularly troubled. Genesis 40, 6-7 records his compassionate response. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them, and saw that they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" This simple question reveals so much about Joseph's character. Even as a prisoner himself, even in the midst of his own difficult circumstances, he had the emotional capacity to notice and care about the troubles of others. He wasn't so consumed with his own problems that he became blind to the needs of those around him. This is the mark of a man whose heart has been enlarged by suffering rather than embittered by it. Their answer revealed the source of their distress. And they said to him, "We each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please." Genesis 40:8. What a remarkable response this was. Joseph immediately redirected their attention from human limitations to divine possibilities. He didn't claim to have special powers or secret knowledge. Instead, he acknowledged that dream interpretation was a gift that belonged to God alone, while humbly offering himself as a vessel through which God might choose to work. This humility and faith-filled approach to spiritual gifts would serve Joseph well in the years to come. When he eventually stood before Pharaoh, he would give the same kind of answer, acknowledging that the interpretation belonged to God, while offering himself as an instrument for God's revelation. The butler shared his dream first. He saw a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. In the dream, he squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph, speaking under divine inspiration, interpreted this as a promise of restoration. Within 3 days, the butler would be returned to his former position and would once again serve wine to Pharaoh. But Joseph didn't stop with just the interpretation. Genesis 40:14-15 records his heartfelt plea. "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. And also, I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon." Here we see Joseph's humanity shining through. He had faithfully served God and others throughout his imprisonment, but he was still a young man who longed for freedom, who hoped for justice, who dreamed of returning to his homeland and his family. His request was not unreasonable or selfish. He was simply asking for the kind of help that any grateful person might provide to someone who had shown them kindness. The baker, encouraged by the positive interpretation given to the butler, shared his own dream. 3 white baskets on his head, with the top basket full of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds were eating from the basket. Joseph's interpretation was far more sobering. Within 3 days, the baker would be executed, and his body would be hung where birds would eat his flesh. As you settle deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine the weight of this moment for Joseph. God had given him the ability to see into the future through these dreams, but that gift brought both comfort and sorrow. Joy in delivering good news to the butler, but grief in having to pronounce judgment on the baker. Genesis 40:20-22 confirms that everything happened exactly as Joseph had interpreted. Now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. The accuracy of these predictions would have been noted by everyone in the prison. Joseph's reputation as someone through whom God spoke would have spread, adding to the favor and respect he already enjoyed. But more importantly for his future, the butler was now back in Pharaoh's presence, positioned to remember Joseph's kindness and mention his remarkable abilities when the time was right. However, verse 23 adds a note of disappointment. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. For now, it seemed that Joseph's hope for freedom through the butler's intervention had been in vain. But God's timing is always perfect, and this apparent setback was actually part of his plan to position Joseph for an even greater opportunity at exactly the right moment. Tonight, as you rest in God's faithful care, remember that He is developing gifts and abilities in your life just as He did in Joseph's. The experiences you're having now, the challenges you're facing, the skills you're developing, all of these are preparing you for future opportunities to serve Him and bless others. Like Joseph, you may sometimes have to wait longer than you hoped for recognition or reward, but God's timing is perfect, and He is using every season of your life to prepare you for the beautiful purposes He has planned. Sleep peacefully, beloved one, knowing that the same God who gave Joseph the gift of dream interpretation is working in your life too, developing you and positioning you for His perfect timing. Allow your breathing to slow into the gentle rhythm of peaceful rest as we enter what might have been the most challenging period of Joseph's entire journey. 2 long years when it seemed that his faithfulness had been forgotten, when his act of kindness had been overlooked, when the hope he had placed in human remembrance had proven disappointing. Genesis 41:1 begins simply. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. But those 5 words, at the end of 2 full years, represent 730 days and nights of continued imprisonment for Joseph. 730 sunrises and sunsets in a prison cell, while the butler he had helped lived freely in the palace, serving wine to Pharaoh, and apparently never giving a thought to the young Hebrew who had correctly interpreted his dream. Picture Joseph during this season, beloved one. As you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, imagine him waking each morning, perhaps with a moment of hope that this might be the day the butler would remember him, that this might be the day someone would come to the prison with news of his release. But as day after day passed with no word, no message, no sign that anyone beyond the prison walls even knew he existed, that hope must have grown dim. This was Joseph's season of forgotten faithfulness, a time when doing right seemed to bring no reward, when helping others appeared to go unnoticed, when the promises of God seemed more distant than ever. Yet these 2 years were not wasted time in God's economy. They were years of deepening, maturing, and final preparation for the role that would soon be his. During these long months, Joseph continued to serve faithfully in the prison. He continued to oversee the other prisoners with compassion and wisdom. He continued to trust in God's goodness even when human gratitude failed. This consistency of character, this ability to remain faithful even when faithfulness seemed unrewarded, was perhaps the most important qualification he could develop for the responsibilities that lay ahead. Picture Joseph on quiet evenings in his cell, perhaps looking up at the stars through a small window and remembering the dreams of his youth. Did he still believe that God would make him a leader? Did he still trust that the visions of sheaves and stars bowing down would somehow be fulfilled? The temptation to doubt, to become bitter, to give up hope must have been enormous during this season of waiting. But Joseph's faith had been forged in the fires of betrayal, slavery, temptation, and false accusation. It had been tested and proven genuine. 2 more years of waiting, however difficult, could not shake the foundation of trust he had built in God's character and promises. He had learned to find his identity not in his circumstances, but in his relationship with the God who loved him unconditionally. This is one of the most crucial lessons any believer must learn, precious one. There will be seasons in our lives when our faithfulness seems to go unnoticed, when our good deeds appear to be forgotten, when the people we help move on without a backward glance. But God sees every act of service, remembers every moment of faithfulness, and stores up every tear of disappointment in his bottle. During these 2 years, Joseph was also being positioned for perfect timing. If the butler had remembered him immediately after his restoration, Joseph might have been released too early, before Pharaoh had the dreams that would require someone with exactly Joseph's gifts to interpret them. God's delay was not neglect, but precise orchestration of events that would unfold with perfect synchronization. Sometimes God's greatest mercies come disguised as his most painful delays. Sometimes his love is most clearly demonstrated not in what he gives us immediately, but in what he withholds until the perfect moment. Joseph's 2 extra years in prison were actually 2 years of additional preparation for a role that would require every bit of wisdom, patience, and character strength he could possibly possess. Consider what Joseph learned during this season of waiting. He discovered that his joy and peace could not depend on human recognition or external circumstances. He found that God's presence was sufficient even when human friendship failed. He learned that faithfulness is its own reward, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. These lessons would serve him well when he eventually ruled over Egypt. Leaders who depend on constant praise and recognition from others are unstable and insecure, but leaders who have learned to find their validation in God's approval and their own conscience can make difficult decisions with confidence and lead with integrity even when their choices are unpopular. The writer of Hebrews reminds us that God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. Hebrews 6:10. Even when people forget our faithfulness, God never does. Even when our service goes unacknowledged by those we help, it is recorded in heaven with perfect accuracy. Psalm 105:19 speaks specifically of this season in Joseph's life. Until the time that his word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested him. The dreams God had given Joseph were still true, still valid, still destined for fulfillment. But the timing of their fulfillment was in God's hands, not Joseph's. The testing of these 2 years was not meant to destroy his faith, but to refine it, not to crush his spirit, but to strengthen it. As you drift into peaceful sleep tonight, let your heart be encouraged if you are in your own season of forgotten faithfulness. Perhaps you have served others who have moved on without gratitude. Maybe you have been faithful in difficult circumstances without recognition or reward. Possibly you have held on to God's promises for your life, even when they seem delayed beyond reason. Remember Joseph's example. Remember that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match our own expectations. Remember that faithfulness in obscurity is actually the greatest test of character, and passing that test qualifies us for responsibilities we might not yet be able to imagine. 2 full years, 730 opportunities to become bitter or to grow deeper in faith. Joseph chose faith, day after day, night after night. And when the time was exactly right, when Pharaoh needed someone with precisely Joseph's qualifications and character, God would move suddenly and dramatically to fulfill every promise he had made to this faithful servant. Your season of waiting will not last forever, beloved one. Your faithfulness is not going unnoticed. Your God is preparing something beautiful that will more than compensate for every disappointment, every delay, every moment when you felt forgotten. Rest peacefully in that assurance tonight. Like Joseph, your greatest days may still be ahead of you. Trust God's timing, maintain your faithfulness, and prepare your heart for the sudden and wonderful ways He may choose to move in your life. Sleep well, precious child of God. Your faithful Father has not forgotten you, and He never will. Let your body relax completely as we come to the morning that would change not just Joseph's life, but the course of history for an entire region of the world. After 2 full years of waiting, of faithful service in obscurity, of hopes deferred and dreams delayed, God was about to move in a way that would demonstrate His perfect timing and sovereign power. Genesis 41, 1-4 paints the scene for us. Then it came to pass, at the end of 2 full years, that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. Picture Pharaoh waking from this vivid dream, his mind troubled by images that seemed both surreal and significant. In ancient Egypt, dreams were considered messages from the gods, especially dreams that came to the Pharaoh, who was himself considered divine. This was not merely a random collection of nighttime thoughts, but a vision that demanded interpretation and action. But the dream didn't end there. Genesis 41, 5-7 continues. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and good heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed, it was a dream. 2 dreams with remarkably similar themes. Abundance followed by scarcity, plenty consumed by want, prosperity devoured by poverty. Pharaoh awoke with his spirit troubled, knowing instinctively that these visions carried a message of vital importance for his kingdom, but having no idea what that message might be. As you rest peacefully tonight, imagine the scene in the palace the following morning. Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the known world, was deeply disturbed by dreams he couldn't understand. Genesis 41:8 tells us, "Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh." Or picture the palace courtyard filled with Egypt's finest minds, magicians, wise men, counselors, and advisors, all straining to unlock the mystery of their king's dreams. These were men trained in the interpretation of signs and omens, versed in the ancient wisdom of their civilization, experienced in providing guidance to royalty. Yet not one of them could offer an explanation that satisfied Pharaoh or eased his troubled spirit. This failure of human wisdom was not accidental. God was preparing to demonstrate that his knowledge transcends all earthly understanding, that his servants possess insights unavailable to the wisest of this world. All of Egypt's learning and sophistication proved inadequate when faced with a message from the true God of heaven. It was at this moment of human helplessness that divine providence moved the heart of one man who had been silent for 2 long years. Genesis 41:9-13 records the butler's sudden remembrance. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, "I remember my faults this day. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. 2 years too late, but exactly on time, according to God's perfect schedule, the butler finally remembered Joseph's kindness and remarkable ability. His memory had been jogged, not by gratitude, but by necessity. When all of Egypt's wise men failed, he recalled the young Hebrew who had never been wrong in his interpretations. Notice the providence in the butler's words. He described Joseph as a young Hebrew man, emphasizing both his youth and his foreign heritage, qualities that would normally disqualify someone from advising Pharaoh. Yet these very characteristics would work in Joseph's favor, demonstrating that his wisdom came not from Egyptian training, but from divine revelation. The butler also noted that Joseph was a servant of the captain of the guard, indicating that he was still imprisoned, but under the authority of a high-ranking official. This detail would help establish Joseph's location and make him easily accessible when Pharaoh decided to summon him. Most importantly, the butler testified to Joseph's perfect accuracy. Just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. In a moment when Pharaoh desperately needed someone who could unlock the mystery of his dreams, here was testimony of a man who had never been wrong in his interpretations, who spoke with authority that proved itself in fulfillment. Pharaoh's response was immediate. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved and changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. Genesis 41:14. Picture this moment, beloved one, as you settle deeper into peaceful rest. After 13 years away from his father's house, 2 as a slave in Potiphar's household, 11 in prison, Joseph was suddenly summoned to stand before the most powerful ruler on earth. The same God who had given him dreams as a 17-year-old shepherd boy was now positioning him to interpret dreams for Pharaoh himself. The grooming and change of clothing were significant. Joseph had to be made presentable for the royal court, transformed from the appearance of a prisoner to someone worthy to stand before Pharaoh. But more importantly, this physical transformation symbolized the complete change that was about to occur in his circumstances. From the dungeon to the palace, from forgotten prisoner to trusted advisor, from Joseph the slave to Joseph the ruler. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let your heart be encouraged by the timing of God's intervention in Joseph's life. For 2 years, it seemed that his situation would never change, that his faithfulness had been forgotten, that his gifts would remain buried in prison. But in a single morning, everything changed. God moved suddenly and decisively to position his servant exactly where he needed to be at precisely the right moment. This is how our God often works in our lives as well, precious one. Seasons of waiting that seem endless can change in an instant when his time arrives. Circumstances that appear hopeless can be transformed overnight when he chooses to move. Gifts that have been hidden can suddenly be revealed and used in ways beyond our imagination. If you are in a season of waiting, if your circumstances seem unchangeable, if your abilities feel unrecognized and unused, remember Joseph's story. God's timing is perfect, and when his moment arrives, he can move mountains and open doors that no one can shut. Sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that the same God who remembered Joseph after 2 years of silence is watching over your life with perfect love and timing. Your moment of breakthrough may be closer than you think. Rest well, beloved child of God. Like Joseph, you may wake tomorrow to find that everything has changed. Feel your breathing slow to a peaceful rhythm as we witness one of the most remarkable moments in biblical history. The transformation of Joseph from forgotten prisoner to royal advisor in the span of a single morning. After 13 years of preparation through trials and testing, God was about to reveal the full scope of his plan through his faithful servant. When Joseph stood before Pharaoh, freshly shaved and clothed appropriately for the royal court, he was no longer the 17-year-old dreamer who had been thrown into a pit by his brothers. He was now a 30-year-old man, seasoned by experience, refined by suffering, and matured by years of faithful service in difficult circumstances. Every trial had been preparation for this moment. Genesis 41:15-16 records Pharaoh's words and Joseph's remarkable response. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream, to interpret it." So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Picture this scene as you rest peacefully tonight. Here was Joseph, standing before the most powerful ruler on earth, being offered an opportunity that could change his life forever. The temptation to take credit for his gifts, to present himself as a great wise man, to claim special powers that would secure his position must have been enormous. Instead, he immediately deflected all glory to God, acknowledging that any interpretation would come not from his own wisdom, but from divine revelation. This response reveals the depth of character that 13 years of trials had developed in Joseph. Success and recognition had not corrupted his humility. The opportunity for advancement had not compromised his integrity. He remained a man who understood that every good gift comes from above, that wisdom belongs to God alone, and that human instruments should never claim credit for divine works. Joseph's words, "God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace," were both a promise and a prophecy. He was assuring Pharaoh that the God of heaven would provide the interpretation he needed, and that this interpretation would bring peace rather than confusion, clarity rather than fear. Pharaoh then recounted his troubling dreams in detail, describing the 7 fat cows devoured by 7 lean ones, and the 7 full heads of grain consumed by 7 thin ones. As Joseph listened, the Spirit of God was already revealing to him the meaning of these visions, the message they contained for Egypt and the surrounding nations. Genesis 41 to 25-32 records Joseph's interpretation, delivered with authority and clarity that could only come from divine inspiration. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one, and the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will consume the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe." As you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, imagine the impact of these words on everyone present in the royal court. Joseph was predicting 14 years of Egypt's future with specificity and confidence that could only come from supernatural revelation. 7 years of unprecedented abundance followed by 7 years of devastating famine, a cycle that would affect not just Egypt, but all the surrounding nations that depended on Egyptian grain. But Joseph didn't stop with interpretation. Genesis 41:33-36 shows him boldly offering practical counsel to Pharaoh. "Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine." This was more than interpretation. This was a comprehensive plan for national survival. Joseph was outlining a strategy that would require unprecedented organization, massive storage facilities, and a level of government intervention in the economy that had never been attempted before. He was proposing that Egypt prepare for the worst crisis in its history by storing surplus from the years of plenty. The wisdom of this plan was immediately apparent to Pharaoh and his advisors. Genesis 41:37-38 tells us, "So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, 'Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?'" Even a pagan ruler could recognize the divine wisdom flowing through Joseph. Pharaoh's question was rhetorical. In all of Egypt, with all its wise men and counselors, they could not find anyone with the combination of wisdom, integrity, and divine insight that they witnessed in this young Hebrew. What happened next would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Genesis 41:39-40 records Pharaoh's decision. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." In a single day, Joseph went from forgotten prisoner to second in command of the most powerful nation on earth. The boy who had been sold as a slave for 20 pieces of silver was now being elevated to a position of authority that surpassed anything his youthful dreams had envisioned. This dramatic elevation was not luck or coincidence, but the culmination of God's perfect plan. Every experience in Joseph's life had been preparing him for this moment. his early exposure to leadership in his father's household, his administrative experience in Potiphar's house, his management skills developed in prison, his character refined through trials, his gifts proven through accurate interpretations. As you drift toward peaceful sleep tonight, let your heart be amazed by the perfect timing and orchestration of God's plan. For 13 years, it may have seemed that Joseph's dreams would never be fulfilled, that his potential would never be realized, that his life would be wasted in slavery and imprisonment. But God was preparing him all along for a role that would not only fulfill his personal destiny, but save countless lives from starvation. This is how God works in our lives too, beloved one. The delays that frustrate us are often divine preparation. The trials that discourage us are actually character development. The dreams that seem impossible are often closer to fulfillment than we realize. Rest peacefully tonight, knowing that the same God who elevated Joseph in his perfect timing is working in your life with the same love and wisdom. Your story is not over. Your greatest chapters may still be ahead of you. Sleep well, precious child of God, trusting in his perfect plan for your life. Allow your body to sink into complete relaxation as we witness the incredible ceremony that transformed Joseph's identity forever. In the space of a few hours, this Hebrew prisoner had not only interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, but had also been chosen to implement the plan that would save Egypt from the coming famine. Genesis 41:41-42 describes the formal installation. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he arrayed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. Picture this remarkable scene as you rest peacefully tonight. The signet ring was not merely jewelry, but the ultimate symbol of royal authority. When pressed into wax or clay, it carried the full power of Pharaoh himself. Every document sealed with that ring had the force of royal decree. Every order stamped with its impression commanded absolute obedience throughout the empire. By placing this ring on Joseph's finger, Pharaoh was literally putting the government of Egypt into his hands. The garments of fine linen were equally significant. This was not the rough clothing of a slave or even the modest dress of a servant. This was the finest fabric available in the ancient world, woven with threads so delicate that the finished cloth was almost transparent, reserved for royalty and the highest nobles of the land. Joseph, who had been stripped of his coat of many colors 13 years earlier, was now being clothed in garments far more magnificent than anything his father Jacob could have provided. The gold chain around his neck completed the transformation. In Egyptian culture, such chains were symbols of high office and divine favor. They indicated that the wearer held a position of trust and authority directly from Pharaoh himself. This was Joseph's new coat of many colors. But this time, the gift came not from an earthly father, but from the sovereign God who had orchestrated every detail of his journey. Genesis 41:43 continues the account. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. The second chariot, the position of highest honor after Pharaoh himself. As Joseph rode through the streets of Memphis or Thebes, the cry would go before him, commanding all people to bow in acknowledgement of his authority. Can you imagine what this moment meant to Joseph? The dreams of his youth, which had seemed so impossible during the dark years of slavery and imprisonment, were not only being fulfilled, but exceeded. The vision of sheaves and stars bowing down was becoming reality in ways more magnificent than he could have envisioned as a 17-year-old shepherd boy. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the name Pharaoh gave him. Genesis 41:45 tells us, "And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On." The name Zaphnath-Paneah likely means God speaks and lives, or revealer of secrets, a name that perfectly captured Joseph's role as one through whom the God of heaven revealed his will to earth. The marriage to Asenath was equally significant. She was not just any Egyptian woman, but the daughter of the priest of On, Heliopolis, one of the most important religious centers in Egypt. This marriage alliance placed Joseph firmly within the highest levels of Egyptian society and gave him acceptance among the religious and political elite of the nation. As you settle deeper into peaceful rest, consider the profound transformation this represented. Joseph had gone from Hebrew slave to Egyptian nobleman, from forgotten prisoner to recognized ruler, from Joseph the dreamer to Zaphnath-Paneah, the revealer of divine secrets. Yet, through all this elevation, he remained fundamentally the same man, humble before God, faithful in service, committed to righteousness. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of Joseph's character. Success did not corrupt him. Power did not make him proud. Elevation did not cause him to forget his roots or his God. The same humility that had characterized him in Potiphar's house and in prison now marked his conduct in the palace. The same integrity that had kept him from Potiphar's wife now guided his administration of Egypt's affairs. Genesis 41:46 notes, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 30 years old, the same age at which Jesus would begin his public ministry, the age that represented maturity and readiness for great responsibility in Hebrew culture. All of Joseph's experiences from 17 to 30 had been preparation for this moment when he would step into the role God had designed for him from the beginning. The signet ring, the fine linen, the gold chain, the second chariot. These were not rewards for past faithfulness, but tools for future service. God was not just honoring Joseph, he was equipping him for the enormous task ahead. The coming years would require wisdom, authority, and resources on a scale that few men in history have ever possessed. Joseph was being given everything he would need to save not just Egypt, but the entire region from starvation. This is how God works in the lives of his children, beloved one. He doesn't just rescue us from our difficulties, he positions us to be a blessing to others. He doesn't just fulfill our dreams for our own satisfaction. He uses those fulfilled dreams to accomplish his purposes in the world. Joseph's elevation was not primarily about Joseph. It was about God's plan to preserve life and demonstrate his sovereignty over the nations. Tonight, as you rest in the comfort of God's love, remember that every experience in your life is preparation for something greater. The trials that seem to diminish you are actually developing character for future leadership. The delays that frustrate you are divine timing for perfect positioning. The dreams that seem impossible may be nearer to your hand than you think. Like Joseph, you are being prepared for purposes beyond your current understanding. The signet ring of God's authority may be nearer to your hand than you think. The robes of destiny may be ready to be placed upon your shoulders at the perfect moment. Rest peacefully in that hope, precious child of God. Your transformation may be as sudden and complete as Joseph's, and when it comes, you will find that every moment of preparation was worth it. Sleep well, knowing that your faithful God is working all things together for your good and His glory. Let your breathing become slow and rhythmic as we witness the beginning of Joseph's administration during the 7 years of unprecedented abundance that God had foretold through Pharaoh's dreams. These were years that would test Joseph's character in new ways, not through suffering and adversity as he had experienced before, but through success and prosperity, which can be equally challenging to navigate with integrity. Genesis 41, 47, 49 describes what happened during these prosperous years. Now, in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded it. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. Picture the transformation of Egypt under Joseph's wise leadership. Throughout the fertile Nile Valley, the land was producing crops beyond anything the Egyptians had ever experienced. Fields that normally yielded good harvests were producing exceptional ones. Vineyards were heavy with grapes, orchards were laden with fruit, and the granaries were filling faster than anyone could have imagined. But Joseph was not caught off guard by this abundance. He had prepared for it, establishing a comprehensive system for collecting and storing the surplus grain. In every city throughout Egypt, massive storage facilities were constructed, granaries that could hold grain for years without spoilage. A network of administrators and officials was put in place to oversee the collection, ensuring that 1/5 of all produce was set aside for the future. As you rest peacefully tonight, imagine the organizational skills this required. Joseph was essentially managing the world's first national strategic reserve program, coordinating the efforts of thousands of workers across hundreds of cities. He had to develop systems for transporting grain from rural areas to storage facilities, methods for preserving the grain over extended periods, and administrative structures to track and manage enormous quantities of food. This was leadership on a scale that few people in history have ever experienced. Joseph was not just governing Egypt, he was preparing an entire civilization for survival. Every decision he made would affect millions of lives. Every policy he implemented would determine whether people lived or died during the coming famine. Yet through it all, Joseph remained the same humble, God-fearing man he had always been. Success did not go to his head. Authority did not corrupt his character. Prosperity did not cause him to forget the God who had elevated him from the prison to the palace. During these years of abundance, Joseph also experienced personal blessings. Genesis 41-50-52 tells us, "And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction." The names Joseph chose for his sons reveal both his gratitude for God's blessings and his process of emotional healing from the traumas of his past. Manasseh means causing to forget. Not that Joseph had forgotten his family, but that God had helped him move beyond the pain of their betrayal. He was no longer defined by what his brothers had done to him or limited by the wounds of his past. Ephraim means fruitful, a testimony to how God had taken the land of Joseph's affliction and made it a place of blessing and productivity. Egypt, which had once been a foreign prison, had become a place where Joseph flourished and found fulfillment in both his work and his family. Picture Joseph during these prosperous years, beloved one. By day he would ride through the land in his official chariot, inspecting storage facilities, meeting with administrators, ensuring that the collection and preservation of grain was proceeding according to plan. By evening, he would return home to his wife and young sons, enjoying the simple blessings of family life that he had been denied for so many years. Yet even in the midst of these personal and professional successes, Joseph never forgot the purpose behind the abundance. He knew that these 7 good years were not an end in themselves, but preparation for the 7 years of famine that would follow. Every bushel of grain stored, every granary filled, every administrative system established was part of God's plan to preserve life during the coming crisis. This perspective kept Joseph focused and motivated during the years of plenty, when others might have been tempted to relax, to enjoy the prosperity, to reduce their efforts because times were good. Joseph continued working with the same diligence and urgency he had shown in more difficult circumstances. He understood that faithful stewardship during abundance was just as important as faithful endurance during adversity. This is a lesson we all need to learn, precious one. How we handle success often reveals more about our character than how we handle failure. Prosperity can make us complacent. Abundance can make us forgetful of God. And success can tempt us to trust in our own abilities rather than in the one who gave us those abilities. Joseph's example shows us how to remain faithful during seasons of blessing. He continued to acknowledge God as the source of his success. He used his prosperity to prepare for future challenges rather than simply enjoying it for himself. He remained humble and accessible despite his elevated position. He never forgot that his blessings were given to him not just for his own benefit, but for the benefit of others. As you drift toward peaceful sleep tonight, consider how you might apply Joseph's example to your own seasons of abundance and success. When God blesses you with prosperity, remember to remain humble and grateful. When He gives you success, use it to prepare for future challenges and to bless others. When He elevates you to positions of influence, remember that true leadership is service and true greatness is faithfulness. The 7 years of abundance were not just about storing grain. They were about storing up character, wisdom, and resources for the greater purposes God had in mind. In the same way, your seasons of blessing are preparation for the ways God wants to use you to serve others and advance His kingdom. Rest well tonight, precious child of God, knowing that He is preparing you through every season, both the difficult ones and the prosperous ones, for the beautiful purposes He has planned for your life. Sleep peacefully in His faithful love. Allow your body to settle into complete relaxation as we come to the turning point in Joseph's story, the moment when the 7 years of abundance came to an end and the 7 years of famine began. Exactly as God had revealed through Pharaoh's dreams. This transition would test not only Joseph's administrative abilities, but also his heart, as the crisis would eventually bring his own family back into his life in ways he could never have anticipated. Genesis 41:53-57 describes the beginning of this new chapter. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So, when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do." The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all lands. Picture the dramatic change that occurred as you rest peacefully tonight. The fertile Nile Valley, which had been producing record harvests year after year, suddenly began to yield disappointing crops. The life-giving river that normally flooded its banks and deposited rich soil across the land failed to rise to its usual levels. Fields that had been green and productive became brown and barren. The abundance that had seemed limitless just months before was now nothing more than a memory. But Egypt was ready. While other nations watched their people begin to suffer from hunger, Egypt opened its storehouses and found them filled with grain that had been carefully preserved during the years of plenty. The wisdom of Joseph's preparation became evident as millions of people who might have starved instead found food available for purchase. This was validation of divine prophecy on a massive scale. Every detail of what God had revealed through Pharaoh's dreams was coming to pass exactly as Joseph had interpreted. The accuracy of the prediction and the effectiveness of the preparation established Joseph's reputation not just in Egypt, but throughout the known world as a man who spoke for God and whose counsel could be trusted completely. Pharaoh's response to his people's cries for help reveals the complete confidence he had developed in Joseph's wisdom and character. Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do. This was a blank check of authority, a complete delegation of royal power to manage the crisis. Pharaoh was essentially telling his people that Joseph's word was as good as his own. Imagine the enormous responsibility this placed on Joseph's shoulders. As word spread that Egypt had grain while other nations were starving, representatives from countries throughout the region began arriving to negotiate for food. Joseph found himself not just managing Egypt's domestic crisis, but serving as the primary source of relief for much of the civilized world. The phrase "all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain" indicates the scope of his influence during this period. Diplomatic missions that would normally have come to Pharaoh himself were now being directed to Joseph. He was functioning as the de facto ruler of Egypt and the primary coordinator of famine relief for the entire region. This elevation to such prominence must have reminded Joseph of his youthful dreams, but now he could see them being fulfilled in ways that served a purpose far greater than personal glory. The sheaves bowing down were not just symbols of his brother's future submission, but representations of the many nations that would come to him for sustenance. The stars showing him honor were not merely family recognition, but the acknowledgement of peoples throughout the world who owed their survival to his wise leadership. But Joseph's heart during this time was likely mixed with both satisfaction and concern. While he took pride in serving effectively in his role and seeing God's purposes fulfilled through his administration, he must have wondered often about his own family back in Canaan. Let your breathing become slow and peaceful as we come to one of the most emotionally charged moments in Joseph's entire journey. The day when his 10 older brothers, the same men who had thrown him into a pit and sold him into slavery 22 years earlier, stood before him in the palace of Egypt, not recognizing the Hebrew slave they had betrayed in the powerful Egyptian ruler they now desperately needed. Genesis 42:1-5 sets the scene. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with them, for he said, "Lest some calamity befall him." And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Picture this journey from Canaan to Egypt as you rest tonight. The 10 brothers, now middle-aged men with families of their own, were facing a crisis that threatened the survival of everyone they loved. The famine had exhausted their stored food, their flocks were dying, and their children were growing hungry. Pride and past grievances seemed insignificant when faced with the possibility of starvation. Notice that Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's only full brother, with the others. Even after 22 years, Jacob was still protective of Rachel's remaining son, still haunted by the loss of Joseph, still unable to bear the thought of losing another child from his beloved wife. This decision would prove to be significant in the drama that was about to unfold. The journey from Canaan to Egypt would have taken several days, giving the brothers time to reflect on the irony of their situation. They were going to Egypt, the very place they had sent Joseph when they sold him to the Ishmaelite traders. They were going as humble petitioners, seeking help from the very people to whom they had sold their brother. The weight of their past actions must have pressed heavily on their consciences during those long days of travel. Genesis 42:6 describes the moment when past and present collided. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Can you imagine the shock that must have coursed through Joseph's entire being when he saw his brothers prostrating themselves before him? Here was the literal fulfillment of the dreams that had started all their troubles 22 years earlier. The sheaves were bowing down, just as God had shown him in his youth. But instead of satisfaction or revenge, Joseph's heart must have been flooded with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy at seeing his family again, pain at remembering their betrayal, concern for their welfare, and uncertainty about how to respond. Genesis 42:7-8 tells us, Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. The transformation in Joseph's appearance and circumstances was so complete that his own brothers didn't recognize him. The 17-year-old Hebrew shepherd they remembered had become a 39-year-old Egyptian official, dressed in fine linen, speaking Egyptian, and carrying himself with the authority of one who ruled over nations. The boy they had known was gone, replaced by a man of power and dignity they could never have imagined. But Joseph's decision to conceal his identity was not born of cruelty or a desire for revenge. As you settle deeper into peaceful rest, consider what might have been going through his mind. He needed to know whether his brothers had changed, whether they felt any remorse for what they had done, whether they would treat Benjamin with the same cruelty they had shown him. He also needed to know about his father. Was Jacob still alive? How had he coped with the loss of his beloved son? Joseph's rough treatment of his brothers, accusing them of being spies, questioning their motives, demanding proof of their honesty, was actually a form of testing. He was probing their character, observing their reactions, trying to discern whether 22 years had brought any change to their hearts. Genesis 42:9 reveals what was really driving Joseph's actions. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." He remembered the dreams, not with vindictiveness, but with wonder at how God had been faithful to fulfill every detail of what he had revealed so many years before. Allow your body to relax completely as we witness Joseph's careful and deliberate testing of his brother's character. What we're about to see is not cruelty disguised as justice, but love expressed through wisdom. A man who understood that true reconciliation requires genuine repentance and transformation of heart. After questioning his brothers and demanding that they bring Benjamin to prove their honesty, Joseph made a decision that revealed both his mercy and his strategy. Genesis 42:25-26 tells us, "Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys and departed from there." Picture this act of secret generosity as you rest peacefully tonight. Joseph could have simply sold them grain and sent them away. Instead, he gave them exactly what they needed and secretly returned their money as well. This was not just business. This was love in action, even while maintaining the appearance of official distance. But Joseph's plan included an element designed to test their consciences. By returning their money without their knowledge, he was creating a situation that would force them to wrestle with questions of honesty, integrity, and guilt. When they discovered the money in their sacks, they would have to decide how to respond. Genesis 42:27-28 describes their shock when they discovered Joseph's secret gift. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was, in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, "My money has been restored, and there it is, in my sack." Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, "What is this that God has done to us?" Notice their immediate response. What is this that God has done to us? After 22 years, the brothers were still living with guilty consciences about what they had done to Joseph. Their first instinct when faced with something mysterious and troubling was to assume it was divine punishment for their past sins. The guilt they had carried all these years made them interpret even an act of kindness as potential judgment. This reveals that their consciences had not been completely seared by time. The memory of their betrayal of Joseph still haunted them, still made them fearful when unexpected things happened. God had been working in their hearts all these years, keeping alive the awareness of their guilt, so that when the time came for reconciliation, they would be prepared to acknowledge their sin. When they returned to their father Jacob and told him about their encounter with the Egyptian ruler, their discovery of the money only added to the family's distress. Genesis 42:35-36 records Jacob's response when they found that all their money had been returned. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks, that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me." Jacob's lament reveals the depth of his ongoing grief over Joseph's loss and his fear of losing another son. The old patriarch was interpreting these events through the lens of his pain, seeing them as further evidence that God was against him, rather than recognizing them as part of a divine plan to restore his family. Consider the irony of Jacob's words. He felt that all these things are against me, when in reality all these things were working together for the restoration of his family. The son he thought was dead was alive and in a position to save them all. The money that frightened him was evidence of that son's love and provision. The demands that seemed harsh were actually steps toward a reunion that would heal decades of pain. Let your breathing slow to a gentle rhythm as we witness the painful decision that Jacob finally had to make when the famine continued and their stored grain was exhausted. Sometimes God uses circumstances to move us toward the very thing we fear most, knowing that on the other side of that fear lies the blessing we need most desperately. Genesis 43, 1-2 sets the scene. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass, when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, "Go back, buy us a little food." The word "little" reveals Jacob's state of mind. He was hoping that perhaps a small purchase would be sufficient, that somehow they could avoid the painful condition the Egyptian ruler had imposed for any future transactions. But Judah, who had been the one to suggest selling Joseph to the merchants 22 years earlier, now stepped forward with the courage to confront his father with reality. Genesis 43, 3-5 records his words. But Judah spoke to him, saying, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Picture the transformation that had been taking place in Judah's character. This was not the same man who had callously suggested profiting from his brother's misery years before. The famine and the frightening encounter with the Egyptian ruler had been working in his heart, developing a sense of responsibility and courage that would make him a true leader among his brothers. Jacob's response revealed the depth of his protective love for Benjamin and his ongoing grief over Joseph. And Israel said, "Why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you had still another brother?" In his pain and fear, Jacob was looking for someone to blame for their impossible situation. But his son's answer showed that they had been as careful as possible under the circumstances. Finally, faced with the choice between risking Benjamin's safety and watching his entire family starve, Jacob made the hardest decision of his life. But notice who convinced him. Genesis 43, 8-10 records Judah's plea. Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we could have returned this second time." This was a remarkable transformation in Judah's character. The man who had once been willing to profit from a brother's suffering was now willing to take full responsibility for a brother's safety, even to the point of bearing eternal blame if anything went wrong. God had been using the circumstances of their lives to refine and mature Judah's heart, preparing him for the leadership role he would one day hold among the tribes of Israel. Jacob's final consent came with a mixture of resignation and hope. And their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, now do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry down a present for the man. A little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned at the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother also, and arise, go back to the man." Even in his fear, Jacob was trying to do everything possible to ensure a favorable outcome. The gifts he chose were the finest products of Canaan, items that would be precious in Egypt during the famine. The double money showed his integrity and desire to make restitution for what might have been perceived as theft. But perhaps most touching of all was Jacob's final word as his sons prepared to leave. "And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved." In this moment of surrender, Jacob was placing his trust not in his own planning or his son's careful behavior, but in the mercy of God Almighty, El Shaddai, the God of more than enough, the God who had been faithful to him throughout his long and often difficult life. Allow your body to sink into complete relaxation as we witness one of the most emotionally charged meals in all of Scripture, a feast where the host knew exactly who his guests were, but the guests had no idea they were dining with the brother they had betrayed over 20 years before. This dinner in Joseph's house was filled with mystery, tension, and deep emotion that none of the brothers could understand. Genesis 43:18-23 describes their fear as they were brought to Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us, to take us as slaves with our donkeys." When they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they spoke with him at the door of the house and said, "O sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. And it happened, when we came to the encampment, that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand. And we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." But he said, "Peace be with you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. Picture this scene as you rest peacefully tonight. The brothers, expecting punishment for the money they found in their sacks, were instead greeted with peace and reassurance. The steward's words, "Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks," revealed that Joseph had instructed his household staff about his family's faith. Even in maintaining his disguise, Joseph was ensuring that God received the credit for the kindness being shown. The reunion with Simeon must have been emotional for all of them. Here was their brother, returned safely from what they had feared might be harsh imprisonment, clean and well cared for, rather than mistreated. This was another sign of the Egyptian ruler's unexpected mercy, though they still couldn't understand the reason for such kindness. Genesis 43:24-25 tells us how they were prepared for the meal. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys feed. Then they made ready the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. The foot washing and care for their donkeys showed the kind of hospitality reserved for honored guests, not suspected criminals. Every detail of their treatment was designed to put them at ease and demonstrate respect, though they remained puzzled by such generous treatment from someone who had spoken so harshly to them during their first visit. But nothing could have prepared them for what happened when Joseph arrived. Genesis 43:26-28 records the moment. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed down before him to the earth. Then he asked them about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" And they answered, "Your servant our father is in good health. He is still alive." And they bowed down their heads and prostrated themselves. Imagine Joseph's emotions as he heard these words about his father. Jacob was alive. The old patriarch had survived the long years of grief, the famine, the hardships of life in Canaan. Joseph's heart must have been flooded with joy and relief, though he had to maintain his official composure and hide the tears that threatened to overflow. But then came the moment Joseph had been longing for, his first sight of Benjamin in over 20 years. Genesis 43:29-30 captures the intensity of this reunion. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now his heart yearned for his brother, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Picture this scene, beloved one. Benjamin, now a grown man with a family of his own, standing before the brother he barely remembered, receiving a blessing from someone he didn't recognize. Joseph, seeing the face that reminded him so much of their shared mother Rachel, struggling to maintain his composure while his heart broke with love and longing for this precious brother. The blessing Joseph spoke over Benjamin, "God be gracious to you, my son," carried deeper meaning than anyone present could understand. This was not just the courtesy of a foreign official, but the heartfelt prayer of a loving brother who had missed over 20 years of Benjamin's life and wanted nothing but God's best for him. Joseph's need to withdraw and weep privately shows us the enormous emotional cost of maintaining his disguise. Every moment with his family was both joy and agony. Joy at seeing them again, agony at not being able to reveal himself and embrace them openly. But he understood that the time was not yet right, that there were still tests to be completed and hearts to be prepared for full reconciliation. When Joseph returned, he had regained his composure sufficiently to continue the elaborate meal. Genesis 43:31-34 describes the amazing dinner that followed. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread." So they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. Because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. So the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them from before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs, so they drank and were merry with him. The seating arrangement Joseph ordered was impossible to explain by coincidence. He seated them in perfect birth order, from oldest to youngest, something that only a family member could have known. The brothers' astonishment at this mysterious knowledge was another piece of the puzzle that was slowly revealing Joseph's true identity, though they still couldn't put the pieces together. Joseph's special attention to Benjamin, giving him 5 times as much food as the others, was both a test of his brothers' hearts and an expression of his own affection. Would they resent Benjamin's favored treatment the way they had once resented Joseph's? Or had their characters been refined by the years of difficulty and responsibility? The fact that they drank and were merry suggests that they accepted Benjamin's special treatment without the jealousy that had once characterized their response to favoritism. This was a sign of growth and maturity in their characters, evidence that God had been working in their hearts throughout the intervening years. Let your breathing become slow and peaceful as we approach the climactic test that would reveal whether Joseph's brothers had truly changed. whether their hearts had been transformed by the years of difficult and responsibility, whether they were ready for the full revelation and reconciliation that was soon to come. Joseph's plan for this final test was both brilliant and heart-wrenching. Genesis 44:1-2 describes his instructions to his steward. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his grain money." So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. Picture Joseph making this decision as you rest tonight. He was about to put his beloved Benjamin in apparent jeopardy, to create a situation that would terrify his father and test his brothers to the very core of their beings. This was not cruelty but wisdom. Joseph needed to know beyond any doubt that his brothers would protect Benjamin rather than abandon him, that they had learned to value family loyalty above their own safety. The silver cup was not just any drinking vessel, but Joseph's special divination cup, the one allegedly used for fortune-telling in Egyptian religious practices. By planting this sacred object in Benjamin's sack, Joseph was creating a situation where Benjamin would appear guilty of stealing something of enormous religious and political significance, a crime that would warrant the death penalty or permanent slavery. Genesis 44:3-6 tells us what happened next. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and with which he indeed practices divination? You have done evil in so doing." So he overtook them, and he spoke to them these same words. Imagine the shock and confusion of the brothers when they were overtaken by Joseph's steward and accused of theft. They had been feeling relieved and grateful, amazed by the kindness they had received, carrying gifts for their father and good news about their reception in Egypt. Suddenly they found themselves accused of betraying the very man who had shown them such unexpected mercy. Their response revealed both their confidence in their innocence and their willingness to accept severe consequences if any wrongdoing was found among them. Genesis 44:7-9 records their words. And they said to him, "Why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves." This offer reveals how completely confident they were in their innocence. They were willing to stake their lives and freedom on their certainty that none of them had stolen anything. But their words also created the very trap that Joseph had designed. Their own declaration would soon bind them to consequences they couldn't escape. The steward's response showed mercy mixed with justice, and he said, "Now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless." This was actually more lenient than their own suggested punishment, but it still meant that whoever possessed the cup would become a permanent slave in Egypt. Genesis 44:11-12 describes the search that followed with dramatic tension. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Picture this moment as you settle deeper into peaceful rest. One by one, the brothers' sacks were opened and searched. One by one, they were cleared of suspicion. The tension must have been building as the search progressed, with relief growing among the older brothers as their innocence was established. But then came the devastating moment when the silver cup was discovered in Benjamin's possession. The brothers' response to this discovery reveals how much they had changed from the men who had callously sold Joseph into slavery years before. Genesis 44:13 tells us, "Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city." They tore their clothes in grief, not just Benjamin, who was now facing slavery or death, but all of them. They shared in his anguish, identified with his plight, refused to abandon him to his fate. Most significantly, they all returned to the city together. They could have taken the steward's word that they were blameless and continued their journey home to safety. Instead, they chose to stand with their endangered brother. This was the exact opposite of their behavior 22 years earlier. Then, they had abandoned Joseph to slavery without a backward glance. Now, they were voluntarily returning to face whatever consequences awaited them, rather than leave Benjamin to face his crisis alone. When they appeared before Joseph, their humility and unity were complete. Genesis 44:14 tells us, "So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground." Notice that Judah is mentioned by name. He was emerging as the spokesperson and leader of the group, the one who would bear the primary responsibility for their family's fate. Joseph's words to them revealed both his authority and his apparent disappointment. And Joseph said to them, "What deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination?" But Judah's response revealed the depth of transformation that had taken place in his character. Genesis 44:16 records his remarkable words. "Then Judah said, 'What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he, also with whom the cup was found.'" Let the power of Judah's confession wash over you. He didn't try to argue Benjamin's innocence or demand proof of the charges. Instead, he acknowledged that God was using this situation to expose their guilt. Not the false guilt of stealing a cup, but the real guilt they had carried for over 20 years regarding their treatment of Joseph. "God has found out the iniquity of your servants." These words revealed that Judah understood this crisis as divine judgment for their past sins. The brothers had been living with guilty consciences all these years, and now they saw their chickens coming home to roost. They were finally ready to accept responsibility for their actions and face the consequences of their choices. But Joseph wasn't finished with his test. He offered them what seemed like mercy, but was actually the most challenging part of the entire examination. Genesis 44:17 records his proposal. "But he said, 'Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father.'" Let your body relax completely as we witness one of the most powerful speeches in all of Scripture. Words that would not only secure Benjamin's freedom, but would also demonstrate the complete transformation of a man's heart. Judah, who had once suggested selling Joseph into slavery for profit, was about to offer himself as a slave to save Benjamin from that very fate. Genesis 44:18 begins Judah's remarkable address. "Then Judah came near to him and said, 'O my Lord, Please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh." Notice the humility and respect in Judah's approach. This was not the arrogant, selfish young man who had callously disposed of his brother years before. This was a mature leader who understood both proper protocol and the gravity of the situation. Judah's speech began by carefully reviewing the history of their interactions with Joseph, showing respect for the Egyptian ruler's authority while building a case for mercy. Genesis 44 in 1923 records his careful recounting. "My Lord asked his servants, saying, 'Have you a father or a brother?' And we said to my Lord, 'We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him.' Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him.' And we said to my Lord, 'The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die.' But you said to your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more.'" Every word of this review was painful for Joseph to hear. When Judah spoke of "his brother is dead," Joseph had to maintain his composure while listening to his own death being matter-of-factly reported. When Judah described their father's desperate love for Benjamin, Joseph's heart must have ached with longing for that same paternal affection that he had been denied for over 20 years. But Judah continued, painting a vivid picture of their father's anguish when they had told him Benjamin must go to Egypt. Genesis 44:24-29 captures Jacob's heartbroken response. "And it happened, when we went up to your servant my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, 'Go back and buy us a little food.' But we said, 'We cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down. For we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us.' Then your servant my father said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me. And I said, Surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave." Picture Joseph's emotions as he listened to these words describing his father's ongoing grief over his supposed death. For 22 years, Jacob had mourned his beloved son, never knowing that Joseph was alive and well. The pain in his father's words, conveyed through Judah's speech, must have been almost unbearable for Joseph to hear. But Judah's speech was building toward its climactic moment. Genesis 44:30-32 shows him describing the impossible situation their father now faced. "Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen, when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever." Feel the weight of responsibility that Judah was carrying. He had personally guaranteed Benjamin's safe return to their father. He had pledged to bear eternal blame if anything happened to the young man. This was not just about Benjamin's welfare, but about Judah's own honor and integrity. But then came the moment that would change everything. The moment when Judah's complete transformation became evident for all to see. Genesis 44:33-34 records his stunning offer. "Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord. and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? Picture this moment, beloved one. Judah was offering to trade places with Benjamin to become a slave in Egypt so that his younger brother could return home safely. The man who had once suggested selling Joseph into slavery was now volunteering to become a slave himself to save another brother from that fate. This was not just sacrifice. This was complete substitution. Judah was willing to give up his freedom, his family, his future, everything, so that Benjamin could be free. He was choosing to bear the consequences that rightfully belonged to someone else, asking nothing in return except the knowledge that his family would be safe and whole. The transformation was complete and absolute. The selfish, greedy young man who had valued profit over family had become a mature leader who valued family over everything else, including his own welfare. The brother who had once participated in family destruction was now willing to sacrifice everything for family preservation. Allow your breathing to slow to the gentlest rhythm as we approach the most emotionally overwhelming moment in Joseph's entire 13-year journey. The moment when he could no longer contain his true identity, when the love in his heart overcame every other consideration. When 22 years of separation finally came to an end with 3 simple but earth-shaking words. Genesis 45:1 captures the intensity of this moment. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Picture this scene as you rest peacefully tonight. Joseph, who had maintained perfect composure through months of testing and probing, who had spoken Egyptian and acted the part of a foreign ruler with flawless consistency, suddenly reached the breaking point of his emotional endurance. Judah's speech, with its offer of substitutionary sacrifice and its vivid description of their father's anguish, had stripped away every defense and revealed the overflow of love that Joseph could no longer contain. His command to clear the room showed his wisdom even in this moment of overwhelming emotion. What was about to happen was too personal, too intimate, too sacred for the eyes of servants and officials. This was a family matter that required privacy, a moment of vulnerability that needed to be protected from public observation. Genesis 45:2 tells us, "And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it." The Hebrew word used here suggests not just tears, but deep, convulsive sobbing. The release of 22 years of suppressed grief, longing, love, and pain. These were not tears of sorrow, but tears of overwhelming joy mixed with heartbreak. Joy at being reunited with his family. Heartbreak at all the years that had been lost. Then came the moment that changed everything forever. Genesis 45:3 records the words that shattered the brothers' world and rebuilt it in the same instant. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. "I am Joseph." 3 words that carried the weight of a lifetime. 3 words that revealed the impossible, explained the inexplicable, and transformed everything the brothers thought they knew about their situation. The powerful Egyptian ruler who had held their fate in his hands was the brother they had betrayed, the dreamer they had sold into slavery, the son their father had mourned as dead for over 2 decades. Try to imagine the shock that must have paralyzed the brothers in that moment. The floor of their understanding had just collapsed beneath them. Everything they had experienced in Egypt suddenly made sense. The strange kindness, the mysterious knowledge, the special attention to Benjamin, the inexplicable favor they had received. It had all been love in disguise, forgiveness in action, a brother's heart reaching out to them even while they remained ignorant of his identity. But with recognition came terror. If this was truly Joseph, then they were at the mercy of the brother they had wronged beyond measure. He had the power to destroy them completely, to repay their betrayal with interest, to make them suffer as they had made him suffer. Their inability to answer him came not just from shock, but from paralyzing fear of the retribution they knew they deserved. Joseph, however, had no intention of revenge. His heart was too full of love, his understanding too complete of God's sovereign plan, his character too refined by years of walking with God to waste this precious moment on recrimination or punishment. Genesis 45:4 shows us his immediate response to their fear. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near. Then he said, "I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Please come near to me." These gentle words revealed Joseph's heart in its entirety. Instead of commanding them to grovel or demanding they maintain their distance, he invited them closer. Instead of emphasizing his power over them, he emphasized their relationship to him. "I am Joseph your brother," not "I am Joseph your victim," or "I am Joseph your judge," but "I am Joseph your brother." The relationship took precedence over the offense. Love overcame the wound. Family identity superseded personal pain. But Joseph didn't stop there. What came next was one of the most profound theological statements in all of Scripture. A perspective on suffering and providence that could only come from a heart that had been refined in the furnace of adversity and emerge with unshakable faith in God's goodness. Genesis 45:5-8 records Joseph's amazing interpretation of their shared history. "But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Though now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt." Let the magnitude of Joseph's perspective wash over you. He was not denying the reality of his brother's sin or minimizing the pain it had caused, but he was placing their actions within the context of God's sovereign purpose, seeing their betrayal as the unwitting instrument of divine providence, understanding his suffering as the pathway to his calling as a savior of nations. God sent me before you to preserve life. This was how Joseph viewed his entire 13-year journey from pit to palace, not as a tragic series of injustices, but as a divinely orchestrated mission to save lives on a massive scale. Not as punishment for dreams that were too grand, but as preparation for a role that was grander than any dream. Joseph could see what his brothers could not yet see, that their family's survival, and indeed the survival of countless others, had depended on him being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, with exactly the right authority to coordinate the famine relief that was keeping entire nations alive. Their act of betrayal, intended to destroy him, had actually positioned him to become their savior. This is one of the most beautiful examples in all of Scripture of Romans 8:28 in action. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. Joseph's love for God had enabled God to work even the worst intentions of others into his perfect plan for blessing and preservation. But Joseph's revelation wasn't complete yet. Genesis 45:9-11 shows him immediately turning from explanation to action. "Hurry and go up to my father, and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household, and all that you have, come to poverty. For there are still 5 years of famine." Joseph's first concern was for his father's welfare and the family's survival. He wasn't content just to reveal his identity. He was making immediate provision for their future. The land of Goshen was some of the finest pastoral land in Egypt, perfect for their flocks and herds. His promise to provide for them wasn't charity, but family love expressed through practical care. Let your body sink into complete relaxation as we witness the beautiful aftermath of Joseph's revelation. Moments of pure emotion, tender embraces, and healing words that washed away 22 years of separation, grief, and misunderstanding. These were not just tears of relief, but tears of restoration. Not just embraces of greeting, but embraces of forgiveness and love. Genesis 45:14-15 captures the overwhelming emotion of these first moments of reconciliation. "Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that, his brothers talked with him." Picture this scene as you rest peacefully tonight. Joseph, who had been forced to maintain emotional distance for so long, finally able to embrace his beloved Benjamin, his only full brother, the one who shared his mother Rachel's blood, the one he had been separated from when Benjamin was still just a child. 22 years of longing, 22 years of wondering, 22 years of love, held in check, finally found expression in an embrace that spoke more than words ever could. Benjamin, suddenly understanding that the powerful Egyptian ruler who had shown him such kindness was actually the brother he barely remembered, must have been overwhelmed with emotion as well. The stories he had heard about Joseph, the grief he had witnessed in his father, the empty place in their family that had never been filled. Suddenly it all made sense, and the brother who had been lost was found again. But Joseph didn't stop with Benjamin. He embraced each of his brothers in turn, kissing them and weeping over them with the same intensity of love and forgiveness. These were the men who had stripped him, thrown him in a pit, and sold him into slavery. Yet Joseph's heart held no resentment, no desire for revenge, no conditions for relationship. His love was complete and unconditional, flowing freely without regard for past wounds or present worthiness. The phrase, "and after that his brothers talked with him," is significant. Their initial shock and fear had rendered them speechless, but now, having experienced Joseph's love and forgiveness firsthand, they were able to engage in conversation. The barriers that had existed between them, barriers of guilt, fear, misunderstanding, and time, had been broken down by the power of unconditional love. What followed was likely a flood of questions, explanations, and shared memories. The brothers would have wanted to know about Joseph's journey, his experiences in Egypt, how he had survived and thrived. Joseph would have been eager to hear about their father, their families, their lives in Canaan, all the years he had missed. Years of separation were being bridged by hours of conversation, years of silence broken by the sharing of hearts. But Joseph's concern wasn't just for the present moment of reconciliation. He was already thinking ahead to the practical needs of his family. Genesis 45:16-20 tells us about Pharaoh's generous response when he learned of Joseph's family. Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, "Joseph's brothers have come." And it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, do this. Load your animals and depart. Go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded, do this. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. Also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." Pharaoh's response reveals the high regard in which Joseph was held. The king was not just tolerating this family reunion, he was actively facilitating it, offering the very best of Egypt to Joseph's relatives. The offer of carts for the journey, the promise of the finest land, the assurance that they need not worry about their possessions. All of this demonstrated royal generosity that went far beyond normal hospitality. This royal favor was not just kindness to Joseph's family, it was recognition of Joseph's invaluable service to Egypt. Pharaoh understood that the man who had saved Egypt from famine deserved to have his family near him, and the kingdom that had benefited from Joseph's wisdom could certainly afford to provide for his relatives' needs. Genesis 45:21-24 describes the generous provision Joseph made for his brother's journey home. Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And to his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed, and he said to them, "See that you do not become troubled along the way." Notice Joseph's special attention to Benjamin: 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments, compared to 1 change of garments for each of the others. This was the same kind of favoritism that had once caused such jealousy among the brothers. But now there was no resentment, no complaint, no murmuring. The brothers had been transformed by their experiences and by witnessing Joseph's forgiveness. They could celebrate Benjamin's special treatment rather than resent it. Joseph's final words to them, "See that you do not become troubled along the way," revealed his understanding of human nature and his concern for his brother's emotional well-being. He knew that as the shock wore off and they had time to process what had happened, they might be tempted to fall into arguments, blame, guilt, or worry about how their father would react to the news. His gentle warning was encouraging them to focus on the joy of the moment rather than the regrets of the past or the anxieties of the future. Let your breathing become slow and rhythmic as we travel with Joseph's brothers on their journey back to Canaan, carrying news so incredible, so impossible, so wonderful that they themselves could hardly believe it was true. Their carts were loaded with gifts. Their hearts were full of amazement, and their minds were struggling to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Picture this caravan as you rest peacefully tonight, 11 men who had left home in desperation, fearing for Benjamin's safety and their family's survival, now returning with more than they had ever dared to hope for. The Egyptian carts that Pharaoh had provided were unlike anything commonly seen in Canaan, sturdy, well-constructed vehicles that spoke of royal favor and abundant provision. The physical evidence of their encounter was overwhelming. Each brother wore new garments, fine Egyptian clothing that marked them as people who had found favor with the highest authorities in the land. Benjamin not only had his 5 changes of clothing, but also carried 300 pieces of silver, a fortune that represented security for his entire future. The 20 donkeys loaded with Egyptian goods were visible proof that something extraordinary had happened in Egypt. But the most precious cargo they carried was not material, but informational. The knowledge that Joseph was alive, that he was well, that he held a position of incredible authority and influence, and that he still loved his family with a devotion that had remained unchanged by time or suffering. How do you begin to explain the impossible? How do you prepare someone for news that will transform their understanding of everything that has happened for the past 22 years? They had to discuss their approach to their father. Jacob was an old man who had carried the grief of Joseph's loss for over 2 decades. The shock of learning that his beloved son was not only alive, but was the second most powerful man in Egypt could be overwhelming. They needed to break this news carefully, gently, in a way that would bring joy rather than physical collapse. They also had to grapple with their own emotions and memories. The journey gave them time to process the magnitude of Joseph's forgiveness, to marvel at God's providence in orchestrating their family's salvation, and to come to terms with how completely their understanding of their past had been transformed. Every mile toward home brought them closer to a conversation that would change their father's life forever. Every step of the journey was filled with anticipation, excitement, and perhaps some anxiety about how Jacob would receive this incredible news. Genesis 42:25-26 tells us, "Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them." Picture Jacob receiving this news as you drift towards sleep. Imagine an elderly man, weathered by years of grief, suddenly hearing words that seemed to contradict everything he had believed for over 2 decades. Joseph is still alive. How do you process such a statement when you have been mourning someone as dead for 22 years? Jacob's initial reaction was understandable. His heart stood still, meaning he was shocked into a state of emotional paralysis. The news was simply too good to be true, too wonderful to be believed, too contrary to his accepted reality to be processed immediately. Sometimes the human heart needs time to adjust to joy, just as much as it needs time to adjust to sorrow. But the brothers had come prepared for this reaction. Genesis 42:27 tells us, "But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Joseph's specific messages, spoken in ways that only he would speak, addressing concerns that only he would address, demonstrated knowledge and care that could only come from their lost son. The carts themselves were proof, not just of Egyptian favor, but of someone who understood their family's needs and was providing for them with generous abundance. Gradually, the truth began to penetrate Jacob's heart. The evidence was too strong to deny, the details too specific to be fabricated. the provision too real to be imagined. His beloved Joseph, the son of his heart, the child he had thought was torn to pieces by wild beasts, was not only alive, but was in a position to save his entire family from the famine that threatened their survival. Genesis 45 and 28 records Jacob's response once he fully grasped the truth. Then Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." It is enough. These words reveal the heart of a man who had been given more than he had ever dared to hope for. Jacob wasn't asking for anything more, wasn't demanding explanations for the years of grief, wasn't questioning why this knowledge had been withheld for so long. The knowledge that Joseph was alive was sufficient to transform his entire perspective on life. I will go and see him before I die. This was the dream of an elderly father's heart. Jacob was approximately 130 years old at this time, well aware that his days on earth were numbered. But now he had a reason to live that he hadn't possessed for 22 years. The possibility of seeing his beloved son again, of embracing him, of hearing his voice, of being reunited with the child of his heart. If you are carrying grief tonight, if you have given up hope for something precious that seems lost forever, if you have resigned yourself to believing that certain dreams will never come true, remember Jacob's story. The God who could keep Joseph alive and position him to save his family is the same God who holds your future in his hands. Sometimes the news that seems too good to be true is actually the truth that God has been preparing to reveal in his perfect timing. Sometimes the restoration that seems impossible is exactly what he has been orchestrating behind the scenes of our lives. Rest peacefully tonight in the hope that your God is full of surprises, that his plans for you are good, and that he delights in exceeding your expectations with his lavish love and provision. Sleep well, precious child of God, knowing that he may have impossible news of his own to share with you in his perfect timing. Allow your body to relax completely as we join Jacob and his entire household on their journey to Egypt, a momentous migration that would mark the beginning of Israel's long sojourn in a foreign land, setting the stage for the great story of Exodus and redemption that would unfold centuries later. Genesis 46, 1-4 tells us about a crucial stop Jacob made along the way. So Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night, and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." So he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes." Picture this scene as you rest peacefully tonight. Jacob, now called Israel, had stopped at Beersheba, a place rich with family history, where both his father Isaac and grandfather Abraham had built altars and encountered God. Before taking his family into a foreign land, Jacob wanted to seek God's guidance and blessing for this major transition in their lives. The sacrifices he offered were expressions of worship, gratitude, and submission to God's will. Even though he was eager to see Joseph again, Jacob understood the importance of acknowledging God's sovereignty over this move and seeking his blessing for what lay ahead. God's response was immediate and reassuring. The double calling of his name, "Jacob, Jacob," indicated the importance and intimacy of this divine communication. This was not just permission to go to Egypt, but divine encouragement and promise for the journey ahead. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. God understood that Jacob might have reservations about leaving the promised land, about taking his family into a foreign culture, about the long-term implications of this move. The Lord's assurance addressed these natural concerns with specific promises that would sustain Jacob and his descendants through the years ahead. I will make of you a great nation there. This was a renewal of the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac. Egypt would not be a place of diminishment, but of multiplication, not a land of defeat, but of development into the great nation God had always intended Israel to become. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. God was promising his presence during their sojourn and their eventual return to the promised land. This was not abandonment to a foreign land, but a temporary relocation under divine supervision with a guaranteed future return. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. This was a tender promise that Jacob would indeed see his beloved son again, and that Joseph would be present at his death to perform the final act of filial love, closing his father's eyes when he passed from this life to the next. Imagine the comfort these promises brought to Jacob's heart. At 130 years old, he was embarking on the most significant journey of his life, not knowing exactly what lay ahead, but knowing that God would be with him every step of the way. Genesis 46:5-7 describes the magnitude of this migration. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives, in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. So they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. This was not just a family visit, but a complete relocation of the clan of Israel. The carts that Pharaoh had provided were put to good use, carrying the elderly, the children, and the family's possessions. The livestock and goods they brought represented their wealth and livelihood. They were not going to Egypt as refugees, but as an established family with resources and dignity. The biblical text then provides us with a detailed genealogy of Jacob's family, listing all 70 souls who went down to Egypt. This careful record serves multiple purposes. It preserves the family history, demonstrates the fulfillment of God's promises to multiply Abraham's descendants, and sets the stage for understanding how a family of 70 would eventually become a nation of millions. As the caravan made its way toward Egypt, imagine the emotions that must have filled every heart. The older members of the family carried memories of the promised land and uncertainty about what awaited them in a foreign culture. The younger members were excited about the adventure ahead and the reunion with Uncle Joseph that they had heard so much about. For Jacob himself, every mile brought him closer to the moment he had been dreaming about since learning that Joseph was alive. After 22 years of grief and loss, after decades of wondering what had become of his beloved son, he was finally going to see Joseph again, to embrace him, to hear his voice, to witness firsthand the amazing life God had given him in Egypt. But this journey was about more than just a family reunion. God was positioning his people exactly where they needed to be for the next phase of his plan. Egypt would provide protection during the remaining years of famine, space for the family to grow into a nation, and eventually the context for the great deliverance that would demonstrate God's power and establish Israel's identity as his chosen people. Genesis 46:28-29 describes the moment when the journey reached its destination. Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him, and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Picture this reunion as you drift towards sleep. Joseph, the powerful ruler of Egypt, setting aside all protocol and rushing to meet his father. Jacob, the aged patriarch, finally laying eyes on the son he thought he would never see again. The embrace that lasted a good while. Not just a moment of greeting, but an extended time of tears, of love, of wonder at God's faithfulness in preserving and reuniting their family. Joseph's tears were tears of joy at seeing his father again, but they were also tears of grief for all the years they had lost, all the experiences they had missed sharing, all the milestones and moments that separation had cost them. Yet underneath the complex emotions was profound gratitude to God for making this reunion possible. Genesis 46:30 records Jacob's response to this long-awaited moment. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." These words echo the ancient story of Simeon in the temple, who said he could depart in peace after seeing the Christ child. Jacob's heart was so full of joy and completion that he felt ready to face death, having received the gift he had stopped daring to hope for. But God was not ready for Jacob to die yet. There were still 17 good years ahead for the old patriarch in Egypt, years of peace and provision, years of watching his family grow and prosper, years of enjoying his relationship with Joseph and getting to know his grandchildren, Manasseh and Ephraim. Let your breathing become slow and peaceful as we draw our time together to a close, reflecting on the beautiful 13-year journey we have walked with Joseph from the pit to the palace, witnessing God's gentle care through every trial, every triumph, every moment of seeming abandonment and ultimate restoration. Joseph lived in Egypt for another 71 years after this reunion with his father, serving faithfully as Pharaoh's right hand, managing the nation's affairs with wisdom and integrity, and watching his family grow from 70 souls into the beginning of a great nation. Genesis 50:22 tells us, "So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years." Picture Joseph in his later years as you rest tonight. The young dreamer who had been thrown into a pit had become an elder statesman, respected throughout the known world for his wisdom and administrative ability. The teenager who had been sold into slavery had become a father figure to Pharaoh and a savior to countless people who had been preserved from starvation through his careful planning and management. But perhaps most beautifully, the son who had been separated from his family for 22 years had enjoyed 17 wonderful years of restoration with his father and brothers. Genesis 47:28 tells us, "And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. Those 17 years were years of peace and provision, years when the family was together and secure. Years when Joseph could care for his aged father and watch his own sons grow up surrounded by their grandfather's love and the extended family they had been separated from for so long. When Jacob's time came to die, he blessed each of his sons, speaking prophetically over their futures and the futures of the tribes that would come from them. His blessing over Joseph was particularly beautiful, reflecting the character and destiny that had been forged through trials and proven through faithfulness. Genesis 49:22-26 records Jacob's blessing. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. Joseph was indeed a fruitful bough by a well. His life had brought blessing and nourishment to everyone around him. His branches had run over the wall. His influence had extended far beyond his immediate circumstances to bless nations and preserve life on a massive scale. The archers had bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. A poetic description of all the trials, betrayals, and injustices Joseph had endured. But his bow remained in strength. His character, his faith, his integrity had not been broken by suffering, but had been strengthened through it. Most beautifully, the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. Joseph's ability to bear his burdens, to serve effectively, to forgive completely, to love unconditionally, had come not from his own strength, but from divine empowerment. When Joseph's own time came to die, many years later, he gathered his family around him and spoke words that revealed his unshakable faith in God's promises. Genesis 50:24-25 records his final testimony. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. Even in death, Joseph was looking forward with faith, trusting in God's promises, believing that his family's sojourn in Egypt was temporary and that God would eventually bring them back to the promised land. His final act was to ensure that when that great exodus occurred, his bones would be carried back to the land of his fathers, completing his own journey home. Centuries later, when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, he remembered Joseph's request. Exodus 13:19 tells us, And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. Joseph's bones were carried through 40 years of wilderness, wandering and finally buried in the promised land, in the plot of ground that his father Jacob had purchased in Shechem. Even in death, Joseph finally came home. Let your heart be filled with wonder at the completeness of God's plan for Joseph's life. From the dreams of his youth to the burial of his bones in the promised land, every detail was woven together in a tapestry of divine purpose and love. The young man who had been betrayed by his brothers became their savior. The dreamer whose visions had seemed impossible became the instrument of their fulfillment. The son who had been mourned as dead became the means of life for his entire family and countless others. This is how our God works, beloved one. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and creates something beautiful. He uses our trials to prepare us for our triumphs. He transforms our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths. He works all things together for good, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Tonight, as you rest in his faithful care, remember that the same God who guided Joseph through his 13-year journey from pit to palace is guiding your life with the same wisdom, love, and gentle care. Your story may be different from Joseph's, but your God is the same. Like Joseph, you may face trials that seem overwhelming, betrayals that break your heart, injustices that make no sense. delays that test your faith. But also, like Joseph, you can trust that God is with you in every circumstance, working through every situation, preparing you for purposes beyond your current understanding. The dreams God has placed in your heart are not accidents or wishful thinking. They are previews of the beautiful future He has planned for you. The trials you face are not punishments, but preparation. The delays you endure are not denials, but divine timing for His perfect purposes. Rest peacefully tonight, precious child of God, knowing that your Heavenly Father loves you with an everlasting love, that He has plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. Like Joseph, you are held safely in His hands, guided by His wisdom, and destined for purposes that will amaze you with their beauty and significance. Sleep well in His gentle care, beloved one. Your journey from pit to palace may be just beginning, or it may be nearly complete. But wherever you are in the process, know that your faithful God is with you, working all things together for your good and His glory. Sweet dreams, precious one. May you rest in the assurance of His unchanging love and wake tomorrow ready to embrace whatever beautiful chapter He is writing in your life. The God who never sleeps is watching over you tonight. Rest peacefully in His everlasting arms. Amen. May the God of Joseph be your comfort, your strength, and your guide as you rest tonight and always. His gentle care surrounds you now and forever.